Growing up, I never expected how much my life would change. In a small, tight-knit town, I was the odd one out, more focused on school than fitting in. While my classmates were into sports and parties, I was absorbed in books and computer programming. During this time, I found my passion for business, though most people just saw me as the quiet, nerdy guy. Despite my shyness, I couldn't ignore Beverly, the girl everyone admired. She was everything I wasn't: confident, popular, always in the spotlight. I never imagined we'd connect. But life has a way of surprising you. Years later, that untouchable girl became my wife. To understand this, you need to know a bit about me. I'm Cliff Chandler. In high school, I was labeled a nerd. Beverly, whom I now call Bev, was the head cheerleader and prom queen, practically royalty in our school. She was dating Buster Snipes, the football captain, and though I thought he was a fool, they made a striking couple. I wasn't part of their world, but I heard the rumors about their wild behavior at parties. After high school, I went on to get an MBA at the University of Virginia. In the MBA program, I became close with my business finance professor. After graduating, I returned to Petersburg and worked at a small firm while developing software on the side. My professor heard about my project and encouraged me to start my own company, offering to help me get it off the ground. With his guidance, I set up a private corporation and my software took off, leading to a highly successful business. As the company grew, I hired my professor as a consultant. Around the same time, I ditched my wireframe glasses for contacts, and my MBA classes helped me build confidence. I learned to stand my ground, and in many ways, that marked the start of my transformation from a nerd to a businessman. About 4 months after starting my business, I visited a potential client and ran into Bev, who was the president's secretary. I recognized her immediately, but it took her a moment to remember me. We had a pleasant chat while I waited for my meeting, and I couldn't help but notice she was even more attractive than in high school. Before I left, we agreed to catch up sometime, though I didn't think much of it afterward. She seemed out of my league. A few weeks later, I returned for another meeting, and Bev mentioned she was disappointed we hadn't met up yet. I was surprised she remembered. A couple of weeks later, we finally got together. Our first meeting went so well that we started dating regularly. We had a lot in common and felt at ease with each other. She often remarked on how much I'd changed and regretted that we hadn't connected earlier. Though we didn't have sex, she introduced me to new sensations and wanted me to take her to bed, but I was raised to avoid premarital sex. We got married 7 months later. During our time together, she made it clear that she wasn't a maid, but I didn't mind. I couldn't believe someone like her would be interested in me. We had an early afternoon wedding, and our wedding night was planned in San Francisco, with a honeymoon in Hawaii the next day. That night, as a maid, I experienced a whole new world of closeness. On the flight to our honeymoon, we even joined the Mile High Club. Once we arrived, the cab ride to the hotel was anything but ordinary, as Bev couldn't keep her hands off me. I was overwhelmed by this new sexual experience, feeling both embarrassed and intrigued by emotions I had never encountered before. When we got to our room, we showered together. She emerged a little later wearing a sheer nightgown that left nothing to the imagination. She lay on the bed and, in a soft voice, said, "Sweetie, this is our wedding night. It's time to consummate our union." Our first time together was intense. We spent most of the night having sex and nearly missed our flight to Hawaii the next morning. Exhausted, we slept through most of the flight. I won't go into details, but during our 2 weeks in Hawaii, we had a lot of sex. By the end of our honeymoon, I felt like I had become an expert. I wondered why I'd never thought about sex before. Bev's experience was clearly not from books or movies, but her past didn't bother me. During our first year, Bev told me about her relationship with Buster. They had been serious, but after graduation, she realized he wasn't going anywhere. He ended up working in construction, got caught stealing, and became known to the police. Eventually, he moved to Philadelphia, and she lost track of him. Life was great for us until about a month ago. Our 10th high school reunion was approaching. I wasn't too interested in going, but Bev was excited to reconnect with old friends. Many had moved away, married, or disappeared, so we decided to attend. We sent in our RSVP with the reunion fee. The committee rented a ballroom for the event, and each class had a hospitality suite. The night before the reunion, we talked about what to expect. I reminded Bev that everyone was 10 years older and likely married, but she was eager to see her old friends. She listed off names but didn't mention Buster, so I asked if he'd be there. She paused and said she didn't know, but if he was, I didn't need to worry. He was a loser. On reunion night, Bev looked stunning in a beige cocktail dress that showed off her amazing figure. I was proud to be with her and knew she'd turn heads. She asked if I approved, and I responded with a passionate kiss. As I pulled away, she teased, "Don't get your motor running too soon or too fast, Buster." I wasn't sure if it was just a word choice or something more, but she headed back to put on her lipstick before we left. At the hotel, we got our name badges and mini yearbooks with old photos and updated names for married women. Bev was quickly swept up in greetings and compliments from her old friends, while I mingled with a few guys I had known. It took over half an hour to get Bev to the main ballroom, where she was again surrounded by her friends. I shuffled around until the dinner call was made. I glanced through the yearbook and didn't see Buster's picture, which was a relief. Some people who couldn't attend had sent notes and paid the fee to support the reunion. When Bev asked if she could sit with her old friends, I was disappointed but didn't say so. I ended up at a table with other spouses, far from Bev. Dinner was dull, and I remembered why I hadn't wanted to come. After some speeches and a toast, the bar and dance floor opened. I heard a commotion near Bev's table and saw Buster step up to her. She threw her arms around his neck and gave him a kiss. Then he took her hand and led her to the dance floor. I was furious. I walked onto the dance floor, tapped Buster on the shoulder, and said, "The first and last dance belongs to the spouse." Bev gasped and said, "Honey, you remember Buster, don't you?" I replied coldly, "Yeah, I remember. This dance is mine." Buster, not recognizing me from school, reluctantly stepped aside. After he left, Bev criticized me for not being friendlier. I realized Bev had been drinking a lot. I apologized, but told her I never liked Buster, and that hadn't changed. I added, "You ditched me before dinner, and now you're jumping into someone else's arms. Am I just extra baggage tonight?" She smiled, apologized, and said she just wanted to catch up with old friends. "We have a lifetime together," she said. "Don't rein me in too tight." I wasn't happy, but we finished the dance. I told her to have a good time, but asked her to ease up on the drinking. She promised to save some dances for me, but seemed annoyed and said, "Don't be a stick in the mud. I know how to handle my booze." I sat alone, frustrated, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. It was Penny, an old classmate. We talked briefly, and she warned me to keep an eye on Bev and Buster. I reassured her that I trusted Bev, but she advised me to stay alert. After Penny left, another old friend, Glinda, approached. We danced and caught up, but when I glanced at the dance floor, I saw Bev and Buster dancing far too closely. I excused myself, went to cut in, and Buster snarled at me, telling me to get off the floor. Bev, clearly drunk, giggled as he shoved me. His old teammates moved in, and I realized I was outmatched, so I backed off. Later, Penny came over and told me Buster was angry after realizing I was the nerd from school. Bev, drunk, was joining in on jokes at my expense. I was quietly seething. When Buster stepped away, I asked Bev to dance, hoping to defuse the situation. She loudly refused, and when I suggested we go home, she snapped, "I'm not ready to go yet, so piss off." As I reached for Bev, one of Buster's buddies grabbed my arm and slurred, "Bev said she's not ready. What didn't you get?" Now, 3 of Buster's friends surrounded me. I tried again. "Bev, it's time to go." 2 of them grabbed me and threw me across the dance floor, knocking down 2 couples. The crowd, used to Buster's bullying, just stepped aside. Meanwhile, Bev laughed and pointed at me, saying, "Go sit down until I'm ready. I'll tell you when it's time to leave." Buster and his gang took over the dance floor, and nobody dared to intervene. I knew I had no support to confront them, so I accepted an invitation to sit with Penny, Glinda, and their husbands. I couldn't bear watching Bev and Buster anymore, so I turned away, trying to enjoy the conversation. I told them, "I didn't expect to see Buster here. Bev was sure he wouldn't show." Penny gasped, "You didn't see the last mailing? Buster's name was listed, but he hadn't paid for the dinner or reunion. He must have hitched a ride." My stomach knotted as I realized Bev had lied about doubting he'd show up. After 1 a.m., Penny returned with bad news. "There's action in the hospitality suite, and you're not going to like it." I stood, but Penny grabbed my arm. "Cliff, don't go. You'll just get hurt." I replied, "That's my wife. I can't just sit here." I rushed upstairs and barged into the suite. What I saw made my blood boil. Bev was provocatively dancing with Buster, her dress up around her hips, underwear gone. Buster had no pants on either. The crowd was chanting, "Go, Buster, go," as they danced suggestively. I moved toward them, but 2 of Buster's friends grabbed me. The dance stopped, and Buster sneered, "Well, if it isn't our favorite nerd riding in to save the fair maiden." Everyone laughed. Buster taunted, "If you want her, come and take her." His friends shoved me toward him, and Buster punched me hard in the stomach, knocking the wind out of me. As I gasped for air, he mocked, Get up and fight for her, nerd. Bev walked over, mocking me too. Don't you love me enough to fight? I thought I married a man. Buster lifted me by my shirt, ready to punch me again, but then laughed. He's not worth bruising my knuckles. Tie him to a chair so we can watch a real man in action. They tied me up, and the crowd cheered as Bev began undressing. I screamed, Bev, stop! Let's go home! Buster sneered. This is what a woman needs, not someone like you. Bev slapped me and said, Right, Buster, sweetie. Then they stuffed a napkin in my mouth to keep me quiet, as Buster and Bev had Zex in front of me, cheered on by the crowd. When they finished, Buster untied me and challenged me. Let's settle this like men. Whoever wins takes her home. I pulled the napkin from my mouth and warned Bev, there will be consequences for this. Stop now. She barely looked at me. I'm busy. Besides, you haven't won yet. I glared at Buster. Screw you. But before I could react, he punched me again, and I flew into the hallway. Lying there, I heard the doors slam and the laughter from inside, with Bev's voice joining in. I staggered to my feet, cleaned up in the restroom, and returned to the ballroom. Most guests had left or were leaving, but Penny and her husband were still there. As soon as she saw me, Penny hurried over, concerned. Cliff, I'm so sorry. I had a feeling this would happen with Buster around. He didn't book a room and may try to bring Bev home with him, and probably Jimmy too. At that moment, I solidified my plan. I'd overheard them discussing going to Jack's house after the hotel. After saying my goodbyes, I grabbed my cell phone from the car and called my friend, Sergeant Tim Albright at the police station. Tim, it's Cliff. You'll want to know about this. There are cars leaving soon, and I'm sure the drivers are well over the limit. Tim chuckled. I'll send 3 cars right away. Always happy to return the favor to Buster. After hanging up, I searched the ballroom and found Buster's jacket with his driver's license and car keys. His car was a rental, so I went outside, found it, and removed the valve stem from the front tire. Then I called the rental company to confirm that emergency service would take over an hour to arrive. On my way out, I saw Tim blocking the intersection with his cruiser. He waved and asked, They still in there? I nodded. They'll be out soon. Want to watch? I parked around the corner and returned to watch the show. Within 20 minutes, 9 cars were pulled over and all drivers were arrested. Some spouses were too drunk to drive, so police drove them home. Others had their cars towed. Tim walked over. What about Buster and your wife? They've been delayed, I said, just as my phone rang. It was Bev, drunk and angry. Where the hell are you? Why didn't you wait for me? I replied calmly. You made it clear I wasn't man enough for you tonight. Tell Baldwin to take care of you. I hung up, but a few minutes later, Bev called again, more civil. Buster's bringing me home after he fixes a flat. I invited him and Jimmy to stay over. Be nice, I snapped. You better find a way to dump them and get yourself home. I turned off my phone and told Tim what happened. He offered to come with me. We drove home, and he parked his cruiser next door, hidden behind the fence. He also had a car follow Buster to ensure nothing dangerous happened on the road. As we waited, I had an idea. Tim, you know those spike strips you use to stop cars? He caught on and smiled. I suppose it's possible they could fall out of a cruiser. We placed 2 spike strips in my driveway, positioned just right so they'd be invisible until Buster rolled over them. Tim smirked. I've heard of things like this happening, but this is the first time I've seen it. His radio crackled, confirming Buster had just left the hotel with 2 passengers. Tim told the officer to follow safely and let them reach their destination if possible. 20 minutes later, blue lights flashed outside. I had expected a loud noise when Buster hit the spike strips, but the air quietly escaped from his front tires. Tim and I watched through the window as Buster, Bev, and Jimmy stumbled out of the car, barely able to stand. Buster started making light threats to the officers, but soon one cuffed him and said, "You're under arrest for DUI." Buster swore, and they had to force him into the cruiser. Tim whispered, "Now he's resisting arrest." The officers checked Jimmy's license and found out he had nowhere to stay. They told him he'd be booked as a vagrant. Jimmy swung at one of the officers and missed, which earned him a head slam onto the car in handcuffs. "That's attack on an officer," Tim murmured. Meanwhile, another officer, having secured Buster, questioned Bev and walked her to the door. Her language was unrepeatable. I let her in, and the officer saw Tim. "Hi, Sergeant," he greeted. Tim asked me, "Need anything else?" Bev slurred, "You set this up. Where are Buster and Jimmy going?" I calmly replied, "Yes, I did, and they're headed to jail for drunk driving." Bev shouted, "I'm going to bail them out." Tim stepped forward and warned her, "If you go anywhere near the road, you'll be joining them." She tried to slap him, but I grabbed her arm and said, "Go to bed, Bev, or you'll see a side of me you won't like." She glared but stumbled to the bedroom. Tim looked at me and said, "Call the rental agency about the car. They'll pick it up." I thanked him, and he left. Bev passed out on the bed, and I slept on the couch. Before dawn, I took her checkbook, cash, and canceled our joint credit card. Most of my money was already in safe, separate accounts. The next day, Bev came to the table, looking awful. She didn't make eye contact as I handed her coffee. She mumbled a thanks and started to cry. After a few minutes, she said, "I'm so sorry. I was pretty bad, wasn't I?" I replied, "I wish pretty bad covered it." Before she could respond, the phone rang. It was Buster asking for bail. Bev told me she needed to go. I pushed her back into her chair. "No, Bev. You're not bailing him out. Your checkbook, cash, and credit card are gone. You're not using our money for this." Her eyes widened. "What do you mean, gone?" I leaned in firm. "I'm not sure our marriage can be saved after last night, but let me be clear. If Buster comes near you again, or you even mention him, we're done. Do you understand?" She nodded, sobbing. Buster ended up spending 2 days in jail because no one bailed him out. He was fined for the DUI and rental car damage, which wiped out his savings. He hitchhiked back to town, broke. Jimmy got out a day earlier, but had to borrow money to leave town. Their weekend ended up costing them both. Tim later told me 8 others pleaded guilty to DUI, getting 500 fines and 6-month suspensions. One repeat offender was fined $1,500 and lost his license for a year. I wasn't shedding any tears for them. Bev and I barely spoke for days. I waited for her to make the first move. If her parents hadn't moved nearby, I might have sent her to stay with them. On Wednesday night, as we were getting ready for bed, Bev approached me. "Can we try to repair the damage?" she asked, hugging me and seeking a kiss. I pulled back. "The damage won't be repaired in bed, and we won't have Zex until you get a full medical exam. I'm not risking anything after what you did with Buster." Shocked, she protested, "Buster isn't carrying anything. How could you think that?" I stared at her. "People who sleep around tend to pick things up. You acted like a courtesan. Get checked before you spread anything, and you'll see Dr. Matthews for certification." She begged to go to someone else, but I insisted. She cried all night. The next day, she hugged me, apologized, and said she'd gone to Dr. Matthews. Results would be back the next day. After dinner, she admitted, "I've been thinking a lot about last weekend. I'm sorry. I know you said not to mention him, but you know who I mean. We were lovers in high school, and Saturday night wasn't the first time something like that happened." I interrupted. "Why did you lie to me about Buster being there?" She hesitated, then admitted, "I was afraid you'd refuse to go if you knew he'd be there." I glared. "You knew what would happen at the reunion, didn't you? You planned it." She flinched, then confessed, "Cliff, you knew who I was before we married. I've always loved Zex, and I still want it with other people." Her words hit me hard. I asked, "How long have you been screwing Buster? Since we got married?" She insisted this was the first time since high school. I sat in silence, feeling sick. "Bev, you've told me more than you think. I won't press further now, but understand this. If you want to have Zex with others, ask for a divorce. Our vows are not negotiable." Sobbing, she said, "Cliff, you don't understand." "No, Bev," I replied. "You don't understand. If you can't stay faithful, we can't repair this." I reminded her that our plans to start a family were on hold indefinitely. "We have a lot to fix first, and I'm not bringing children into this mess." She apologized again, crying, and begged for a chance to make things right, suggesting that having a family would help. I told her firmly, "We can try to fix this, but I don't trust you, and we are not starting a family now." She was beginning to grasp the depth of the damage she had caused. Over the next few weeks, we had several discussions and set benchmarks to track our progress. Over the next year and a half, things improved. One thing that surprised and reassured me was that after our argument following the reunion, Bev never mentioned wanting to have Zex with others again. About a month ago, we started talking about having a family, and I began to feel hopeful. But the memories of that night still lingered, and I questioned whether I could truly move past it. I knew I had to protect my interests and ensure I had a way out of the marriage without financial loss, just in case. Every 4 to 6 weeks, Bev started spending a few days with her parents. We agreed she'd call me at 9 p.m. each night. She was a way to stay connected. I liked that this arrangement gave her time with her family while we still had our weekends together. Since I couldn't join her, I gave her $200 each trip to take her parents out. Bev seemed refreshed after each visit, enjoying her time with her parents and reconnecting with old friends. On her last trip, I had some free time and decided to call her. When her mom answered, I asked for Bev, but her mom told me she was at a slumber party at Janice's house and wouldn't be back until morning. I was surprised. "Isn't it kind of early for a slumber party?" Her mom explained that Bev and her friends often got together and sometimes stayed overnight. Then she added something odd. Bev hadn't taken them out in a long time. This confused me since I'd given Bev over $1,000 for that very reason. I called Bev's cell, but it was off. When she finally called later, I asked why she hadn't mentioned the slumber parties. She replied that it hadn't seemed important. When I asked about her phone, she said the battery had died and she left it charging at home. Her answers didn't sit right with me, and I couldn't shake the feeling something was off. Later, I realized I didn't have Janice's number, so I picked up my phone to call Bev's cell again by accident. To my surprise, Bev answered. Startled, I disguised my voice and said, "Mabel?" She replied, "You must have the wrong number," and hung up. The alarms in my head were getting louder. Something was definitely going on. She was lying about the cell phone, and I started to wonder what else she might be hiding. When Bev returned, things seemed normal, but I was now suspicious about her visits to her parents. The story about the hen parties felt weak. We usually shared everything, and I couldn't believe she wouldn't mention these gatherings unless she was hiding something. I concluded the parties were a cover for something she didn't want me or her parents to know about. I began asking more about Janice, whether she worked and how she hosted these parties. Bev said Janice worked, but someone had a key, and the group often met at her house after work. Sometimes they went out for dinner or ordered takeout. When Bev told me about her next trip to see her parents, I decided to take time off and do some snooping. I told both Bev and my coworkers that I had business in Chicago and would be unreachable except by cell phone. Bev left on Tuesday morning, planning to return Friday evening. I gave her a vague story about meetings with clients and moving between hotels. Before she left, she asked if she should take her parents out like usual. I was suspicious again, wondering if she really was taking them out. So I told her I didn't have cash and suggested she put it on her credit card. She frowned and said, "Maybe we just won't go out this time." I wished her a safe trip and later rented a car to follow her. I checked into a motel near her parents' house, conveniently located so I could see her comings and goings. That night, nothing happened. Bev made a quick trip to the pharmacy and came back home. She called at 9 p.m. as planned, and we had a normal conversation. When I asked if she'd have her hen party, she laughed and said yes, they'd get together the next night. Since her last trip, I had gotten Janice's address and phone number. I learned from Bev's mom that Janice had a short, failed marriage and worked at a bank. On Wednesday, I saw Bev leave her parents' house and followed her to Janice's. There were 2 cars parked outside. One was a Camry, and the other was an old Ford with Pennsylvania plates. I thought I saw Janice and a male figure greet Bev as she arrived. I parked at a nearby barn where I could observe without being seen. After picking up a quick meal, I settled in and watched the house. Nothing more happened that night, and I stayed hidden, waiting for answers. At 9, Bev called as usual. There were no background sounds, and she said she was at Janice's with her girlfriends. Something felt off. There were no other cars, and I hadn't seen anyone arrive. Either they were dropped off while I was at the truck stop, or no one else had come. As we were about to hang up, I asked, "How many of you are there?" She lightly replied, "It's not a hen party, but there are usually 6 or 7 of us. Tonight, only 2 others came." Her answer matched what I had seen, so I settled in for the wait. Around midnight, I walked closer to Janice's house, but didn't hear anything, which made sense if there were only a few people. After listening for a while, I returned to my spot. At 2 in the morning, I saw some movement. Bev and another person walked to her car and stood there for a few minutes, though it was too dark to see much. Bev eventually drove off, but no one else left the house. Odd. Back at the motel, I saw her car, confirming she was home. The next day, I drove by Janice's house and noticed the Camry was gone. Assuming it belonged to Janice, I checked the bank parking lots and found it there. I didn't learn much, but decided to stake out Janice's house early that day. Around 3:30, I set up in the thicket again. It was a nice day, and I had a book and a picnic supper to pass the time. Shortly before 6, the Camry returned, and a woman went into the house. I regretted not having binoculars. Later, I heard a car door slam and saw the old Ford leave. I could only make out a man driving, likely the same one I had seen the night before. Then, I noticed a man and a woman on the porch, adding to my confusion. By 7, the lights were on at Janice's, but no one else had arrived or left. Unsure of what was happening, I debated staying or going back to the motel. I figured I could spot Bev's car if she headed back to Janice's. Something was clearly going on. When I arrived at the motel, I was shocked to see Bev's car parked next to the old Ford from Pennsylvania. I sat for a few minutes trying to process it. A horrible thought crossed my mind, so I checked the Ford and found it unlocked. Inside, it was a mess. Trash, clothing, and food wrappers everywhere. I opened the glove box and found the registration. My heart sank. The car was registered to Baldwin Snipes. Buster was here. Bev was with him again. As always, I'm quick to make a plan before acting. When I spotted Buster's wallet on the passenger seat, it all came together. I took his driver's license, a few cards with his name and the registration, then tossed the wallet back. Next, I unlocked Bev's car with my spare key, found her purse, and took her driver's license and credit card. While grabbing her wallet, I found a box of rubbers with several missing and a receipt from the day before, confirming what I'd suspected. Her cell phone was missing too. After putting everything back, I locked the car and went to my room. In my room, I called a college buddy in Pennsylvania and explained the situation. I gave him Buster's license, registration info, and phone number, and asked him to call the Pennsylvania State Police from a payphone, pretending to be Buster and reporting his car stolen. My friend was happy to help. Then I checked Bev's credit card account online. There was a motel charge from earlier that day and a $200 cash advance from the day before. It seemed she was paying Buster to sleep with her and even providing the rubbers. I also found a similar charge from a different motel a couple of months ago. Since this was Bev's card and she managed it, I hadn't paid much attention to it. She'd complained about the $1,000 limit, but never made a big deal. I don't think she knew I had access to all our accounts. I called the credit card company and reported her card stolen earlier that day, explaining that it had been left at home while she was out of town. I flagged the motel charge as fraudulent, but left the $200 cash advance for her to deal with. Finally, I made an anonymous call to the local police, reporting a suspicious car at the motel. Then I disposed of everything I'd taken, including the cut-up credit card in the trash. I didn't care what room they were in. You can fool me once, but not twice. It was satisfying to see everything fall into place, even the parts I hadn't planned. About half an hour after making my calls, I heard a commotion outside. The hotel clerk was telling someone to pay cash or leave because their credit card had been reported stolen. I recognized Buster's voice angrily threatening the clerk, while Bev tried to explain it was a mistake. Buster must have intimidated the clerk, as I heard the door slam and saw the clerk return to the office, where he immediately called the police. They arrived within 5 minutes, spoke with the clerk, and headed toward the room beneath mine. I heard the police knocking, followed by angry voices. One officer checked the license plates of both cars, then ran a check in the cruiser. Soon after, I saw Bev and Buster, handcuffed, being led to the police car. Another officer brought out a plastic bag, likely containing their personal items. About an hour later, a tow truck came for Buster's car. Although disrupting their night gave me some satisfaction, I still felt sick. I sat in my darkened room wondering how things had gotten to this point and what I should do next. Unsurprisingly, Bev didn't make her usual 9 p.m. call. I left a message on her voicemail, expressing concern. Around 10 o'clock, I saw her dad leaving the house in his car, but couldn't tell if her mom was with him. I called her mother, but there was no answer, so I left a message asking her to have Bev call me when she got home. This part was the hardest for me. I had gotten really close to Bev's parents, especially her dad. He once told me how glad he was to have me as a son-in-law and how much he appreciated my positive influence on Bev. He also shared that he and Bev's mom had gone through a rough time with her during her last 2 years of high school. She was popular, but hung out with a crowd they didn't like. They had hoped she would graduate and go to college, but her grades were so poor she had to attend community college before eventually getting into a university. Her dad had almost been in tears when he told me how disappointed they were that she barely qualified for a diploma. He mentioned that the only person ranked lower than her in class was her no-good, muscle-bound boyfriend, Buster. We often talked about her, and I knew there was more he wasn't saying. It didn't surprise me when he said he banned Buster from their house in their junior year. Unfortunately, he couldn't stop her from seeing him. He had even considered early retirement and moving before her junior year, but now he regretted not following his instincts. Our marriage had been a bright spot for her parents. After finishing some emails, I decided I didn't want to stay until morning. Bev was coming home in the afternoon, and I had things to do before she arrived. I packed my stuff and went to the office to check out. It was close to midnight when I was about to get into my car, and another car pulled into the lot. It was Bev's parents. They stopped behind Bev's car, and her mom, who I hadn't seen earlier, got out and went to Bev's car. With the doors open, I could hear Bev crying in the back seat, and her dad didn't sound too happy. Both cars left and headed home. As I drove home, I thought about what had happened. Yes, I was hurt beyond belief, but it was clear that what Bev really wanted was an easy life, and also an affair. I couldn't live with that. She had shown me this twice that I knew of, and probably more behind my back. I was foolish to think she had changed, or would change. By the time I got home, I had accepted reality. We were done. If she hadn't done this behind my back, I might have been more forgiving. But since she did, I figured that if I were generous, I'd only be benefiting that SOB buster. I decided to cut her off completely. Bev didn't know that there were photos of many of their escapades, some taken during the reunion. Penny, an old friend of mine, had made sure I got copies of the reunion photos for future use, as she put it. At the time, I didn't understand what she meant, but now it made sense. I hadn't even looked at those pictures because I didn't need to, but now I realized they could be useful. Around 9 the next morning, I called Bev's house. Her mother answered, and I could tell from her voice she was upset. She said they had received my message, but by the time she gave it to Bev, it was too late to call. She added, "Bev is still in bed. She had a rough night." I replied, "Yeah, I know." She asked what I meant, and I said, "That's not important right now. Please wake Bev up. I need to talk to her. I'll call back in 15 minutes. Her mom started to say something, but I hung up. When I called back, her mother answered again and said, "Bev still isn't up yet, but she'll call you this afternoon before she heads home. She's not up for talking right now." I was trying to stay calm, but my patience was running out. I said, "Mom, Bev is supposed to be home this afternoon before dinner, not just leaving. Please go tell her right now that I know exactly what's going on, and it's in her best interest to come to the phone immediately." Her mom sounded unsure. "Cliff, please be patient. Bev's okay, but she had a really bad time last night. I can't discuss it right now, but please be patient. She'll call this afternoon." I took a breath and replied, "Mom, if all I needed to talk to her about was her getting arrested last night, I'd wait. But this is about a lot more than a few hours in jail." There was dead silence on the other end for a moment, and I wasn't sure if the call had disconnected. Then, in a low voice, her mom said, "Hold on," and went to get her. A moment later, I heard Bev scream, "What? How does he know?" Her mom said something I couldn't make out, and a few moments later, Bev got on the phone. She had regained her composure and said in an overly sweet voice, "Hi, honey, what's this? You told Mom I was in jail? Why would you say that?" I paused for a moment and then said, "Bev, please don't call me honey anymore. I'm sorry for bringing up the fact that you were in jail, but let's drop the act. Actually, I should have said you and your boy toy Buster were taken to jail. You've apparently been meeting and sleeping with him ever since your parents moved back near Philadelphia." There was silence. Finally, in a weak voice, she said, "I'll be home tonight. Can we talk about this then?" "Oh, absolutely not," I shot back. "Don't even think about coming here. There's nothing left to talk about. All you need to do is listen to what I'm saying right now." She begged, "Please, Cliff, not here, where Mom and Dad can hear." "First off, Bev, I don't think your parents are going to hear anything new. They already know you're basically a cheap street hooker, and I guess you didn't catch what I said. I didn't mention a discussion. I said you better listen to what I'm telling you right now. You don't have a home to come back to anymore. There's no home, and there's no husband. The house is going on the market Monday, and you can come pick up whatever you want before it's sold." I continued, "Since I realized I couldn't trust you after the reunion, I refinanced the house. You can expect to get a share of the equity, but it won't be more than $5,000 to $8,000. Our savings account had about $5,000 in it, and half of that is yours." I could hear her start to stammer, but I kept going. "Just so you know, I paid myself a salary of $2,500 a month, and after the divorce, you'll get maybe $1,000 a month in alimony. And to be honest, I'll fight to pay you as little as possible. You can keep the car," I added, "but you'll need to take over the $525 monthly payments right away. There are only 34 payments left, and I won't be making any more." She started cursing at me, and when I mentioned alimony, she screamed, "You make way more than that. I'm going to sue for $10,000 a month in alimony." She lost it when I said, "Yeah, I make more than $2,500 a month, but besides that salary, the company deposits a monthly dividend into my offshore bank account, and you won't get a dime of it." She screamed more profanities, and I heard her dad yell at her that he'd slap her if she didn't stop her foul mouth. I calmly said, "I thought you didn't want your parents hearing all this. You've left me no choice but to file for divorce. And you better get a job fast because Buster sure can't support himself, let alone you two. Oh, and by the way, you'll have access to $125 a month from our checking account until the divorce is finalized." She cursed again, and the line went dead. Not long after, I heard a sharp crack. I think her dad actually slapped her. Then I heard him scream at her to get out of the house until she could act like a lady. A few minutes later, my cell phone rang. It was Bev's dad. He apologized for her behavior and told me she was packing to come home and that she was bringing Buster with her to knock me up. I told him not to worry about me. I'd be out of the house before they got there. During our conversation, he admitted that he had slapped her, and he started to cry, saying her face was swollen and that he had never punched anyone before. That was the final straw for me. There was no way I could love or live with someone so self-absorbed that she didn't care who she hurt. My heart ached for her parents. That was 5 years ago. Looking at things now, I guess I have to admit that being a successful businessman doesn't erase my nerdy side. I've doubled the size of my business and plan to double it again in the next 5 years. I've only seen Bev twice since our divorce was finalized about a year after that night. In the divorce, the judge gave her a little leniency because I hadn't disclosed all the financial information I was supposed to. But due to her blatant infidelity, the judge only awarded her 20% of what she could have gotten. She was awarded $800 a month in alimony until she remarried. Every year on our anniversary, I send her a check for $9,600 to cover the year's payments. I do it this way so I don't have to think about her constantly and to remind her of what she threw away. When I look back at my short first marriage, I remember all the times Bev said she loved me. I've had to wonder many times, was it ever true? The night I ended things, as you know, both Bev and Buster were hauled off to jail. Bev was allowed to call her parents, and with some difficulty, they arranged bail for her. It wasn't easy to handle after 10 p.m. in a small town, but her dad managed to settle things with the motel, and she returned to court the following week. Any charges against her were dropped. Buster, however, spent 2 days in jail until they figured out that the stolen car report was a mistake. He was released on Monday. From the records I've gathered, and based on what Bev's parents told me, this wasn't their first rendezvous. In fact, it was at least the 12th. 7 happened before the reunion, and 5 more after. When I got home, I went through our credit card statements. Bev had kept them all neatly organized. I found 7 airline and hotel charges going back to shortly after we were married. All of them were for Philadelphia and matched up with trips I had taken out of town. On this last trip, Buster had even brought along his buddy Jimmy, who apparently hit it off with Janice. That night, they ended up having a quaternion. The next night, Bev and Buster wanted time alone, so Bev rented a motel room. Since Bev couldn't get Buster out of jail, she spent the next 2 days with Janice. When she returned to her parents' house, her father had kicked her out. On Monday, Bev came home with Buster. But by then, I had already moved all my personal belongings to an apartment and taken 2 weeks off for a vacation in Aruba. They tried to find me, and I'm sure Buster's main reason for coming with Bev was to knock me up. When they couldn't track me down, they trashed the house. They broke furniture, smashed windows, destroyed china, punched holes in the walls, tore down light fixtures, emptied the fridge and pantry onto the carpet, and even threw a chair through the glass shower. In short, they wrecked the place. The realtor called me Tuesday night to inform me of the damage. I told her to have it cleaned and repaired and to send me the bill. I would deduct the costs from Bev's share when we closed. In the end, the house cleared $12,000 after repairs, which cost about $4,000. I got the $6,000 I was owed, and Bev only netted $2,000. Bev tried to deny she trashed the house, but I had 3 neighbors who witnessed the destruction. She didn't fight the claim. When Buster and Jimmy returned to Philadelphia, they had been gone over a week, and both lost their jobs. They had to panhandle and sleep in Buster's car until they found work 2 weeks later. After getting new jobs, Buster became a ward of the state. He couldn't work construction anymore due to injuries from a coworker who was angry Buster had slept with his wife. After that, Buster worked at a telemarketing company. 2 weeks after the incident in Bev's hometown, I met her dad for lunch. He seemed nervous when we sat down. We had a pleasant meal, and after some small talk, he apologized for how things turned out. He repeatedly thanked me for trying to help Bev, and expressed how heartbroken he was when he found out what happened. He said Bev's troubles began when she became a popular, attractive young woman in high school, but gravitated toward the wrong crowd. He found out about her sexual activities late in her sophomore year, and despite his and her mom's efforts to talk to her, it didn't help. The biggest shock came when he told me that Buster had gotten her pregnant at the end of her junior year. They managed to keep the abortion quiet due to summer break. Bev never told me about the abortion. Her dad also revealed that she had been treated for an STD just before the next school year began. This was when he banned Buster from their house. He later learned the pregnancy and STD might not have been from Buster, though it likely was. He didn't realize until much later that Bev had become the high school bicycle. Bev's story is sad. 2 weeks after our breakup, and after Buster got a new job, she moved to Philadelphia to live with him and Jimmy. I don't know how she supported herself, but I can guess. 2 months later, she had another abortion. It wasn't mine since I had been using rubbers ever since we gave up on having a family. Ironically, I had been ready to start a family just before she betrayed me again. Whether it was Buster's baby or not, I believe it was. 6 months later, Bev left Buster around the time he was badly knocked by a coworker for sleeping with his wife. She returned to her parents' house and now works as a waitress at a local coffee shop. She's gained about 40 pounds and no longer looks like the cheerleader she once was. I've heard she's changed quite a bit, largely because her dad keeps her under strict rules. She's allowed to stay with her parents as long as she follows his guidelines. Most of this information has come from her dad. I don't visit them since Bev is still there, but her dad and I talk a few times a year. He called me yesterday and said he'd be in town soon and wanted to talk. He mentioned clearing the air about a lot of things. I'm not sure how I feel about that conversation, but it might answer some lingering questions. This week has been interesting. I met with Bev's dad and he told me more than I care about now. But he did surprise me with one thing. Bev had finally confessed to him that she had married me mostly for financial stability. She just couldn't tear herself away from Buster and the rough exhibitionist sex he offered. She told her dad she regretted letting sex and exhibitionism take over her life. When Buster got her pregnant for the second time while living in Philadelphia, she realized her mistake. She said she had been nothing more than a sex toy for him. He even pimped her out, giving her just enough money for groceries and booze. He abandoned her when he found out she was pregnant. Worse, the abortion was botched, and she'll never be able to conceive again, even if she meets someone decent. I hadn't realized Buster's knocking didn't happen in Philadelphia. It occurred after he moved to Atlanta following their breakup. A friend of Bev's ran into Buster in Atlanta and barely recognized him. He's now a homeless street bum, thin, with broken and yellow teeth, a scraggly beard, and long hair. He's ruined many lives, including his own. Do I feel sorry for him? I'll let you decide. Now for the good part. On Saturday, the same week I met with Bev's dad, I took Penny out for dinner and dancing. Her husband had died in a plane crash about a month after the reunion. Penny and I started dating 4 months ago, and I proposed to her that night. The best part? She said yes. When we first started dating, she didn't think she wanted to marry again, but was glad to have companionship. I wasn't sure about a serious relationship either after what I'd been through. But after our 5th date, she invited me to dinner at her home, and I met her 2 kids. We hit it off, and I think that's when she reconsidered. She realized her children needed a father figure, and we found out we had a lot in common. By our 3rd month together, it seemed inevitable. She was still hesitant, but that Saturday night, I went all in, and she accepted. We married a few months later and just celebrated our 25th anniversary. We added a little boy to our family about 18 months after we married. I sold my business and retired 2 years ago. The kids are grown, and we moved to a beautiful home on Hilton Head Island. I rarely think about my past. Bev's parents passed away several years ago. It was sad, but also a relief. My talks with her dad were never happy and always kept the memory of my first marriage alive. I have no idea where Bev is now, and while it might sound heartless, I really don't care. Although I admit on rare occasions when she crosses my mind, I feel a little sorry for her. And yes, I have to acknowledge that in some strange way, she played a role in my transformation from a nerd to an average Joe. Maybe a little more adventurous than the average Joe. But after everything that's happened, I'm happy now. You can't imagine how much it means when Penny says, "I love you." And I know it's real.
My name is Ron, and my wife Lily and I have been happily married for 15 years. Our family brought me great joy, and I appreciated the love my wife gave me. Over time, our relationship grew, and we had 2 lovely daughters. Both of us had steady, successful jobs. Lily worked as a translator at a film studio, and I worked as a security guard at a company. My love for my wife was immeasurable, and I was confident in her everlasting devotion to me. We were in good health, living in a beautiful house in a nice neighborhood. Our life was full of happiness, and it felt perfect. After our second daughter was born, Lily struggled to lose the weight she gained, but her captivating blue eyes remained attractive. She chose not to wear contact lenses because they caused discomfort when reading or working with papers. Instead, she wore glasses with large lenses, which emphasized the attractiveness of her eyes, making them even more seductive. My love for her remained unchanged. I was sure that she really loved me, as our strong bond was quite obvious. Our family was filled with happiness because we had two beautiful daughters, and financial stability was never a concern. My life was filled with happiness until that fateful moment. After 15 years of marriage, an unpleasant incident occurred that threatened the harmony and perfection of our world. In recent years, Lily has developed a habit of going to parties with her female colleagues. They visited various pubs, alternating their favorite places. On Fridays, they met in these places after work. Lily often assured me that it was just an opportunity to chat and relax. Naturally, I didn't mind her spending time in such places. After all, I invariably came home in the early morning every day and took responsibility for our daughters. On those evenings when Lily was out with her friends, I cooked dinner for our girls and was happy to help them with their homework. Performing these duties brought me great joy. Lily usually returned home around 8 in the evening after her outings, which allowed us to enjoy the weekend with the whole friendly family. We loved to spend time together, which gave us all great pleasure, and by all means. We had dinner together with our daughters on Saturday evenings, but in recent months, there had been a change. Lily started coming home later than usual on the nights she spent time with her friends. Instead of coming home around 8, she'd come home closer to 10, and I could sense that she'd had a few drinks. Despite my remarks, I didn't voice my concern. After all, she remained the same affectionate and devoted wife she had always been. Every time she returned from an outing, her face lit up with a familiar smile, making me want to hug her tightly. I realized that going out with friends served as a way for Lily to relax, allowing her to escape from the pressures of a stressful work week. I reassured myself that her interactions with the co-workers she spent time with were harmless and purely for pleasure. Even if she started coming home later than usual, I saw no reason to worry. But a few weeks ago, on a Monday morning, I received an email from an anonymous sender, who introduced himself as just a friend. At first, I decided to delete the letter without reading it, but after thinking about it, I decided to take the time to familiarize myself with its contents. The letter I received was like this. I happened to be at the Black Crow last Friday evening and noticed your wife among a group of people. She seemed to be enjoying it immensely. I couldn't help but notice that she danced almost exclusively with one particular man from her company. In case you're interested, I decided to capture this moment and took a picture on my mobile phone. Take a good look at the photo, and if you still think there is nothing wrong with her actions, then feel free to ignore this message. There was a file attached to the email that needed to be opened to view the photo. I wondered why someone would send me this message if there was nothing surprising about it. Moreover, the letter had already planted doubts in me, and I felt uneasy about what I was about to find out. It was not pleasant to learn that Lily had danced while walking with a man she had never mentioned before. Up until now, I had always assumed that Lily dated exclusively female colleagues at parties. However, there was a possibility that she was dancing with someone who was already present at the Black Raven, who wasn't really part of their company. Nevertheless, a lump formed in my throat, and an uneasy feeling swept over me. Despite my inner hesitation, I gave in to my curiosity and opened the attachment. When the image appeared on the screen, it was noticeable that it was not quite centered, as if the photographer had taken precautions not to be noticed. In the background, I noticed my wife's colleagues, both men and women, sitting at a long table. Despite the slight blurring of the image, I could still make out my wife on the right, dancing on the dance floor. She was wearing a beige blouse decorated with red flowers and green leaves, and the same brown trousers. It was the same outfit that Lily had worn the last time she went out with her friends. Thus, I came to the conclusion that the photo I am looking at now was taken last Friday. That evening, she came home later than usual. It was 10:30 when she hugged me and looked at me intently. When I looked at the picture, I noticed her happy smile, but something drew my attention. She stood on the dance floor, held closely by a tall young man. They were tightly wrapped around each other, with Lily's arms around his neck. I was quite surprised by what I saw. I couldn't remember ever dancing with Lily in such a bad way, or behaving like that with any other woman in public. The man's lower body pressed against hers, and I couldn't help but imagine the sensations he must have felt due to his obvious attraction. In that position, it seemed natural to feel desire. Strangely, Lily didn't appear alarmed by what was happening. Instead, she wore a pleased smile, suggesting her active involvement when they locked eyes. I felt repulsed witnessing my wife, the mother of our 2 daughters, so close to a stranger and openly displaying affection in public. The disbelief I experienced was beyond words. I knew for certain she would never dance with me in public like that. I couldn't understand why she would allow a complete stranger to act this way with her. A question arose in my mind. Was he truly a stranger? Doubt crept in and grew rapidly, overpowering all my attempts to suppress it. Various scenarios involving my wife and unfamiliar men began to play out in my mind. A strong sense of nausea washed over me, leading me to rush to the bathroom where I regretfully vomited my breakfast. Perplexed, I observed Lily, my beloved wife, behaving in a manner that hinted at promiscuity. Was she really having an affair? How could she betray me and our 2 daughters like this? Countless other questions filled my thoughts, but one kept recurring. Who was this man? I couldn't help but assume he was a colleague of hers. How long had this secret involvement been happening right under my nose? What drove her to engage in such a deceitful relationship with him? Had she betrayed me? I was determined to uncover the truth and gather solid evidence of what had truly occurred. With a renewed sense of purpose, I tried to uncover the latest information about Lily's actions. For the next half hour, I retreated to the bathroom in my room, attempting to regain my composure and mental clarity. As time passed, a whirlwind of emotions stirred within me. Disappointment, sadness, anger, fueling a growing desire for revenge. I found myself gripped by intense feelings that provoked a strong reaction. At one point, I wanted to lash out at Lily, vent my anger and frustration. In the next moment, I wanted to embrace her and implore her to end her relationship with this man. Divorce seemed like a viable option, but within a few minutes, I was already considering forgiveness and giving her another chance. Sitting on the toilet, I began to question my sanity as these tumultuous thoughts consumed me. Eventually, I managed to regain control of my emotions. I decided to avoid impulsive actions and patiently monitor Lily's behavior before taking any definitive steps. It was crucial not to let my emotions dictate my decision, as I needed a clear understanding of the situation before making a choice. No, I had to remain patient and refrain from confronting her with what I had discovered. At the same time, I was resolute about uncovering the truth at any cost. I needed concrete evidence to determine if she was being unfaithful or simply indulging in excessive enjoyment. However, I couldn't ignore the fact that she had deceived me by withholding the full truth about her outings with her friends. I noticed that her workplace was just a few blocks from where I worked. Given my frequent business trips, it was relatively convenient for me to keep an eye on Lily. So, the next day, around 11:30 a.m., I discreetly parked my car at the far end of her workplace's parking lot. Thanks to the tinted windows in my company car, I was confident that I remained hidden from prying eyes as I carefully watched the exit door. I patiently waited there until 1 p.m., but she never appeared. I repeated this pattern throughout the week. Finally, on Friday at 12:15 p.m., I spotted Lily with 3 individuals, 2 men and a woman. They all got into a black BMW with Lily sitting in the front seat next to the driver. Without hesitation, I followed them. Our discreet journey took us through busy streets until we arrived at the parking lot of an upscale restaurant. From my spot across the street, directly facing the restaurant, I observed her cheerful laughter as they entered. Remaining in my car, I patiently awaited their departure, which occurred at 2 p.m. Lily walked alongside a tall man with blonde hair, the same man she had danced with in the photo I possessed. There was an air of excitement and camaraderie about them, evident in her playful interactions with him. It was this display that stoked my anger. Together, they returned to her workplace and disappeared inside. Up until this point, Lily hadn't committed any serious wrongdoing, except for not informing me of her actions. She frequently dined with both men and women. But what troubled me most was the seemingly socializing this group displayed during lunch. 2 couples, clearly not friends or colleagues, and that concerned me deeply. What struck me as unusual was that on that Friday, Lily didn't join her female colleagues for their post-work gathering. She returned home at 5:15 p.m., cheerful and wearing her usual smile, displaying remarkable self-control. I refrained from bombarding her with questions, but as we sat in front of the TV after dinner, I couldn't resist inquiring about her day at work and her lunch. For a moment, she appeared confused, but she quickly responded. She claimed to have had a tuna sandwich she had prepared that morning before heading to work. A liar, and possibly even a cheater. Despite my mounting anger, I couldn't ignore the urge to embrace her when she looked at me with her beloved blue eyes. Even as she uttered this blatant lie, conflicting emotions surged within me, torn between resentment and an overwhelming desire to hold her close. Such deep love for a person could elicit such emotions. I knew full well that I had to maintain my composure and self-control so as not to act impulsively and later regret my actions. Instead of pursuing her with questions, I made a conscious choice to change the subject and discuss my own workday. I attempted to behave as I normally did during our weekends together. Lily didn't seem to sense the gravity of the situation. Furthermore, that evening, we exchanged hot words twice, and she behaved as affectionately as ever, like a loving wife. During our vacation, we decided to take our daughters to the zoo to create cherished family memories. For a while, I forgot about the events of the past week, and our day was filled with laughter and joy. Throughout the week, I refrained from monitoring her whereabouts during lunch, as I planned to track her down on Friday evening after work. When my daughters returned home at 3:15 on Friday, I was already there and eagerly awaited their return. I ordered pizza for them, ensuring their happiness, and explained that I had some business at the office. I left them both. My daughters had become quite independent, and I calmly left them alone in the house, provided they locked the doors. I knew they would be sound asleep in their room by the time I got back. Without hesitation, I got into the car and headed to Lily's workplace, arriving there at 5 o'clock. Observing from a distance, I noticed how she drove out of the parking lot, heading in the opposite direction of our house, indicating her intention to meet her friends at the pub for an evening party. It was not difficult to follow her unnoticed, as a line of 6 cars served as a convenient shield for my car. En route, my wife's Toyota seamlessly merged with other cars heading to various venues like a pub, a gathering place, or a dance hall, depending on one's perspective. 10 minutes later, I spotted Lily's Toyota, along with 6 other cars, entering the parking lot adjacent to an establishment known as the Glass Shoe, which uniquely combined a bar and a restaurant. Choosing to remain discreet, I parked the car at the far end of the parking lot, carefully observing the surroundings from the side. After everyone entered the establishment, I exited the car and took a leisurely stroll around the vicinity. It seemed prudent to gather as much information as possible about the place my wife frequented. The pub stood a distance away from other buildings, surrounded on all sides by a parking lot. 2 of its walls faced the street as the pub occupied a corner space, while the other 2 sides were marked by a neatly trimmed cedar fence standing 5 feet high, in front of which parking spaces were available. At that point, I noticed a black BMW from the group, the same one Lily had used to go to the restaurant the previous Friday. Surprisingly, it was now parked prominently in front of the cedar hedge, distinguishing it from the other cars parked outside the building. Upon closer examination, I realized that the building had 2 different entrances, one leading to the restaurant and the other to a bar situated at the back. Both the bar and the restaurant had fire doors intended strictly for emergencies. On the opposite side, where most of the cars were parked, there was an additional entrance. Moreover, there was another entrance leading to the bar, but Lily's company did not use it. Instead, they chose the entrance leading to the restaurant part of the building. Returning to the car, I retrieved the attire I had prepared for this occasion. Swiftly, I changed into a black windbreaker, donned a baseball cap, and put on glasses to alter my appearance. Finally, I inserted a protective prosthesis into my mouth to slightly modify my facial features, similar to a boxer's mouthguard. Despite its hindrance to speech and drinking, I paid no heed because my intention was not to engage in conversation or consume beverages. Glancing at my reflection in the rearview mirror, I reassured myself that I would remain unrecognizable. After patiently waiting for another hour in the car, I finally entered the bar. I spotted a group including my wife, sitting together near the dance floor enjoying drinks and having a good time. Among them were 6 women and 4 men, including my wife. Upon noticing that my wife was sitting in proximity to the same man she had dinner with the previous Friday, a wave of sadness and disappointment overwhelmed me. I couldn't shake the suspicion that there was something between them. Deciding to distance myself from the situation, I chose a table in the far corner, as far away from them as possible. From my vantage point, I began to closely observe the unfolding events. The spot I selected was dimly lit, occupied by several individuals nursing their sorrows, much like me. I was confident that no one would pay attention to me in this corner. In less than a few minutes, music began to play, luring people to the dance floor. Before I could turn away, I witnessed Lily dancing with a man seated next to her. Strange smiles appeared on the faces of the remaining 3 men at the table as they watched Lily and her partner dance. It became evident to me that Lily and this man were more than mere acquaintances, and everyone nearby was witnessing their dance. Several hours passed, and their group dwindled to Lily, another woman, and 2 men. Eventually, both couples found themselves on the dance floor, leaving no doubt to all present that my wife and this man were lovers. He drew Lily closer, placing his hands on her waist. They swayed on the dance floor with subtle movements, their bodies pressed closely together. In that moment, I witnessed him leaning down to kiss her, whispering something in her ear. I observed her nodding in response, and without hesitation, they left the room hand in hand. Intrigued, I discreetly followed them out into the dark street. I watched them walk hand in hand to his car. Keeping my distance, I observed them enter the back seat. It became clear why he had parked the car in the last row of the parking lot near the cedar hedge. He sought privacy and the absence of prying eyes. With no other cars nearby, the hedge acted as a shield for his vehicle, and he likely felt secure in that location. Curiosity consumed me as I contemplated their intentions. How far was Lily willing to go? Determined to uncover the truth, I cautiously headed to the opposite end of the parking lot. Stealthily, I made my way between parked cars, striving to remain unnoticed. Before I knew it, I was positioned next to the back of his black car. Initially, I noticed an absence of people inside. It crossed my mind that they were likely in the back seat. In the dim light near the hedge, I was certain they wouldn't spot me from inside the car. So I cautiously moved closer and leaned towards one of the rear windows. Unfortunately, the heavily tinted windows made it impossible to see anything. Despite the poor visibility, I could still hear muffled voices from inside the car. I wrestled with the decision of whether to intervene immediately and rescue her, or wait and catch Lily in the act of betrayal. The choice tormented me, but there was no time to make up my mind. As fate would have it, the car started rocking in rhythm with the music, which, to my dismay, happened to be my wife's favorite. My anger overwhelmed me, and without thinking, I yanked the door handle and flooded the car with light from the roof lantern. To my horror, I discovered my beloved wife, Lily, lying on her back with her lover atop her. They were engaged in their illicit activities. I quietly removed my glasses and the denture that concealed my true identity. As the car's interior lit up, Lily's eyes widened in shock and recognition. In seconds, her expression shifted from joy to utter disbelief. After a brief moment, she spoke, her voice trembling and uncertain. "Oh my God, Ron, please forgive me," she muttered. "Don't rush into decisions you'll regret. It meant nothing to me. Just wait for me." I closed the door firmly behind me and swiftly headed to my car. As I drove away from the parking lot, Lily was already chasing after me, urgently pleading for me to wait. Less than 5 minutes later, she arrived home in a disheveled state, tears filling her eyes. "Oh my God, honey, I'm so sorry," she pleaded. "I love you more than anything in the world. I understand that I hurt you, Lily. You broke our marriage vows. In our 15 years together, I've never betrayed you. If I'd known you were cheating, maybe I'd have sought comfort elsewhere too. If fidelity doesn't matter in our marriage, perhaps I'd have sought fleeting pleasures," I said, my voice laced with anger. "Ron, please hear me out. I love you with all my heart. What I did didn't matter to me at all. I wish I could turn back time and fix everything. But it's impossible. You have to believe that you are my world. If you compare my life with yours and our 2 daughters, it doesn't matter at all." Tears streamed down her face as she struggled to contain her emotions, burying her face in her hands as if searching for salvation. Eventually, her legs gave way and she sank onto the sofa, continuing to express her remorse repeatedly. Stop apologizing, I said sternly. What you did to our marriage is unforgivable. Tell me who he is and how long this betrayal has been going on, I said, relieved that she was no longer standing right in front of me. My anger surged as I grabbed her by the neck and shook her, an unfamiliar rage taking hold of me. His name is Nick, she confessed, her voice trembling. He's a colleague from the studio. This shouldn't have happened. Please believe that I love you more than anything. But then a terrible thought crossed my mind. But you must admit your deception, I retorted. You've been lying to me about your outings with friends while secretly seeing him for years. Do you expect me to believe you haven't been deceiving me all this time? In a panic, she exclaimed, Oh my God, no, this happened only recently. Please believe me. My love for you has only grown stronger over time. I beg for your forgiveness and understanding. There was never any genuine love in my actions. Tears welled up in her eyes again, her disheveled appearance and swollen red eyes reflecting the gravity of the situation. She pleaded for forgiveness. No, you don't grasp the seriousness of this situation, I replied, disappointment evident in my voice. Think about your colleagues who witnessed your affair. Think about us. Consider how others will perceive us if they see us together, whether on the street or at the office. It's not just a secret affair anymore. It's a blatant display of infidelity. You've publicly betrayed me. I'm sorry, but I can't bear this humiliation, and I want a divorce. I was resolute in my decision to end our marriage. Ron, please, I'm begging you, forgive me. You know I can't live without you. Please reconsider. I'm genuinely asking for your forgiveness. I promise it won't happen again. Right now, our priority is saving our marriage and protecting our family. As she spoke, I stood up and turned away, needing some solitude to think about our relationship. Lily, our marriage started falling apart when you chose to be unfaithful. The consequences we're facing today stem from that betrayal. Suddenly, a sharp scream pierced the room, followed by sorrowful crying that deeply affected me. When I looked back at Lily, she was on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably with her head in her hands. In that moment, conflicting emotions swirled within me. I wanted to embrace her, offer comfort, but anger and a sense of betrayal prevented me from doing so. I felt incapable of staying close to her, unsure if I could trust myself around her. Silently, I left our home and sought refuge for the night in a hotel room. I couldn't sleep, and my rest was restless and empty. Come morning, I decided to inform my secretary that I wouldn't be coming to work that day. I stayed in my hotel room until noon, pondering the events that had unfolded. Eventually, I managed to work up an appetite and dined sparingly in the hotel restaurant. With a heavy heart, I made my way to the office. Along the way, I couldn't help but glance towards my house. To my dismay, there was a green Toyota parked in front, and this unfamiliar presence heightened my anxiety. I concluded that the green Toyota belonged to Frances, Lily's sister. It was somewhat comforting to think that, in addition to their unfaithful mother, my daughters could rely on their aunt for support. However, I was still unaware of Lily's deteriorating condition. After I left home the previous evening, Lily had confided in her sister over the phone. The severity of the situation overwhelmed her, leading to a sudden breakdown. Now she was in the hospital, grappling with the aftermath of her emotional breakdown. It wasn't until I arrived at my office that I received the news. I received a call from Lily's sister, Francine, and we had a lengthy conversation. According to her, Lily was in an extremely critical condition, constantly in tears and anxious. What shocked me was that less than an hour after I had left the previous evening, my elder daughter had reached out to Francine, informing her that Lily was delusional and I was absent. After their conversation, Francine hurried to my house and witnessed the dire state of her sister. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, she wasted no time in calling an ambulance for emergency medical assistance. Francine assured me that she would stay at my house to care for and support my two daughters during this challenging time. She strongly urged me to visit my wife at Santa Maria City Hospital. When our conversation ended, I was overwhelmed by shock. I realized how selfish and dismissive I had been the night before. The weight of my actions, or lack thereof, weighed heavily on me. Did I truly decide to leave my home, abandoning my daughters and wife when they needed support the most? Maybe. But one thing was clear to me. If I had stayed with her that evening, There was a disturbing possibility, however small, that my emotions could have led to cruelty due to the immense pain caused by her actions. While she may have played a significant role in the breakdown of our marriage, I had never considered myself a person who ignored problems or avoided facing them directly until yesterday. Was that what I did? In this situation, Lily and I were confronted with a monumental issue, certainly a significant one. But was leaving my family when they needed me the most the only way to justify my decision? Regret and guilt overwhelmed me, intensifying my sense of sadness. Tears streamed down my face as I hid behind the table. Deep down, I wondered if there might have been an alternative path, a path of forgiveness, reconciliation, and perhaps even a distant chance to salvage what remained of our relationship. Of course, the fact that we were in this situation was the result of Lily's actions. She bore full responsibility for betraying the sacred trust that should have been reserved solely for me. But the thought of ending our marriage weighed heavily on my heart, knowing it would cause great pain to my two beloved daughters. It became evident that I needed to explore an alternative solution, and I contemplated the idea of forgiveness. Gradually, as I processed the shocking news of Lily's hospitalization, I found a renewed determination. Without hesitation, I got behind the wheel and raced to the hospital, determined to uncover the truth about her actions and understand the situation. Doubt filled my mind, and I entered the hospital without a clear plan or knowing what I would say to Lily. But one thing remained certain. I was determined to seek the truth. As I sat in the hospital, I reflected on a piece of wisdom my mother had once imparted to me. Cheaters always eventually face the consequences of their actions. This idea still lingers in my mind as I think back to my wife's betrayal when she was just 20 years old. Lily and I got married, and our once happy marriage seemed like a dream come true. Our two beloved daughters brought us joy, and our comfortable home in a lovely neighborhood was a symbol of contentment. We didn't have financial troubles, and most importantly, our love was undeniable. However, life took an unexpected turn when, shortly after our younger daughter turned 6, Lily landed a job at a nearby film studio. With her proficiency in multiple foreign languages, she secured a position as a film translator. Her work as a voice translator was truly impressive, providing us with financial stability due to her impeccable skills. For 5 years, my wife excelled in her role until a new translator arrived. This tall, charismatic, blonde-haired colleague quickly became the center of attention among the studio staff. Despite the many admirers he had, he seemed oblivious to their affection. He shared Lily's proficiency in various foreign languages, leading to frequent encounters at work and the blossoming of a friendship that soon deepened. Herein lay the problem that troubled my wife's heart. Love surreptitiously crept into her emotions before she fully comprehended it, leaving her in a state of confusion. Before long, she realized she had fallen for him. Initially, he treated her no differently than other coworkers, focusing on work-related matters and maintaining a professional rapport. But when he began joining their bi-weekly outings, a subtle shift occurred. Gradually, they crossed the line from professional collaboration to a deep friendship. They confided in each other and shared the intricacies of their lives. Lily never discussed any of this with me. Soon, he became a regular presence at gatherings and dinners among their female colleagues. Her first mistake was not informing me when men started attending their gatherings. With time, their connection evolved into something more profound. On the dance floor, swaying to slow songs, they felt like a single entity. However, I remained oblivious to the depth of their relationship. In a dimly lit corner of the dance floor, Lily found herself locked in his embrace, and their lips met in a kiss that was more than just friendly. It was a kiss that shook her to the core. And so, a chain of events was set in motion. The following Friday, during one of their outings, he found a reason to take her away from the pub, ultimately leading to a passionate encounter in his car. Their desires grew, and they soon found themselves entangled like wild creatures in the back seat. Overwhelmed by guilt upon returning home, Lily was determined to give me the love and affection I deserved, unaware that as her husband, I deserved unwavering loyalty. However, due to their daily interactions at work, it became increasingly challenging for her to distance herself from him. They had grown too comfortable in each other's presence. But Lily's love for me remained steadfast. I was willing to sacrifice everything for Ron because my love for him remained unshakable. Lily never intended to hurt me through her infidelity, but she was gravely mistaken in believing that her connection with him surpassed the bond we shared. This affair continued for 4 months, and now she lay in a hospital bed revealing all the details of her betrayal. I listened, shedding tears without interruption. Lily vowed to do whatever it took to save our marriage. However, I couldn't decide whether I could live with the memories of her infidelity, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her. After all, my beloved wife was in a fragile emotional and physical state, and I didn't want to inflict further pain on her. So I returned to my hotel room and contacted my lawyer, asking him to prepare the necessary divorce documents. I was deeply concerned about how the divorce would impact Lily's condition. I didn't want her to suffer, but it seemed inevitable. While the divorce papers were being prepared, I spent quality time with my beloved daughters. I didn't plan to seek custody. Instead, Lily and I should jointly raise them, albeit not under the same roof. However, my plans unraveled when my lawyer delivered the divorce papers to Lily, who was still in the hospital. Her emotional state worsened upon learning of the divorce, and that dreadful day marked a turning point for the worse. She suffered a stroke when she realized I had initiated divorce proceedings. When her doctor informed me of this, I began to despise myself. I should have waited to proceed with the divorce until Lily had fully recovered. I spent 3 days by her side, holding her hand. Lily's condition deteriorated, and even after 2 months she only showed partial improvement. She was left paralyzed on her left side, and it was a heartbreaking situation for all of us. I blamed myself entirely, but at the same time I understood that if Lily hadn't engaged in a secret affair with her colleague, none of this would have happened. No matter how hard I tried to convince myself to stay in the same house with Lily and our daughters, I couldn't do it. Every time I looked at her, I would be reminded of that scene of betrayal in the car. So, I packed my belongings and moved into a nearby rented apartment to stay close to my beautiful daughters. As much as I didn't want it to be this way, it was Lily herself who had turned our once happy life into chaos and suffering.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
Right now, it feels like my life has been torn apart, and I'm barely holding it together. I just need to get this off my chest, even if it's to strangers on the internet. For almost 30 years, I thought I had the kind of life that most people dream of. I married my wife, Linda, when we were young. She was 20, and I was 22. We were broken, but we were happy. We built our life together from the ground up, raising 2 daughters, Betty and Maria, who meant everything to me. Betty, my oldest at 26, has always been the overachiever, valedictorian in high school, graduated at the top of her college class, and now she's getting married this fall to her longtime boyfriend. Maria, my youngest at 24, is the carefree one. She's sweet, always smiling, and has been incredibly close to me since she was little. I always thought I had a great relationship with both of them. Linda and I had a solid marriage. At least, that's what I thought. Sure, we had our ups and downs, financial struggles when the kids were young, arguments now and then, health scares, but through it all, we stuck together. I truly believed we were a team, and I imagined us growing old together, sitting on the porch, reminiscing about our younger days. I loved her with everything I had. Then last week, everything fell apart. It started like any other weekday. Linda told me she was going out for dinner with Betty and Maria. They do this regularly, every couple of weeks, girls' dinner, as they call it. It's their time to catch up, laugh, and talk about things they don't want to share with me. I never minded. In fact, I loved that they were close. It made me proud as a husband and father, like I'd done something right in raising a family that loved each other so much. That night, Linda was upstairs getting ready, and I was in the kitchen, sipping coffee and scrolling through the news on my phone. I can remember it so clearly, the sound of her phone buzzing on the counter. It wasn't unusual. She gets messages from the girls all the time, especially when they're making plans. Without thinking, I picked it up. I'm not proud of what I did next. I didn't have any reason to be suspicious, but something made me open the message. It was from an unsaved number. The message read, "Can't wait to see you tonight." I froze. My first reaction was confusion. This couldn't be right. It had to be a mistake. Or maybe it wasn't what it looked like. I stared at the message for what felt like forever, my mind racing. Finally, I tapped on the thread to see the rest of the conversation. What I found shattered me. The messages weren't long, but they didn't need to be. They told me everything I needed to know. The texts were from her boss, and they were making plans to meet for dinner. But it was clear this wasn't just a business dinner. The tone of the messages was flirty, affectionate. There were texts from earlier that week, like, "I miss you. Once a week isn't enough." Linda replied, "I miss you too." My stomach turned. My heart started racing. My hands were shaking so much that I almost dropped the phone. This was my wife, the woman I'd built my life with, the mother of my children. She was having an affair. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to march upstairs and confront her right then and there, but I couldn't. I was in shock, still trying to process what I'd just seen. I needed more information. I needed to be absolutely sure. A few minutes later, Linda came downstairs, dressed up and looking as beautiful as ever. She smiled at me, kissed me on the cheek, and said, "Don't wait up, okay?" Her voice was so casual, so warm, as if everything was completely normal. I don't know how I kept my composure, but I managed to say, "Have fun with the girls." As soon as she walked out the door, I grabbed her phone and turned on location sharing. I'd never done anything like that before. I'd never felt the need to spy on her, or anyone else for that matter. But in that moment, I didn't care. I needed to know the truth. I sat there for a while, staring at my phone, waiting for her location to update. When it finally did, my heart sank even further. She wasn't heading to the restaurant where she and the girls usually met. Instead, she was going somewhere else, a place we'd been to many times as a family. I quickly texted Betty and Maria. "What time are you meeting Mom for dinner?" Both of them responded almost immediately. Betty said, 7 o'clock. "Can't wait to see her," and Maria said something similar. They were lying. My own daughters were lying to me. I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it, but at that moment, I knew Linda wasn't the only one betraying me. My daughters were part of it too. I waited a little longer, watching Linda's location. She finally arrived at the restaurant. My heart pounding, I grabbed my car keys and drove there. When I got to the restaurant, I parked outside and looked through the window. It didn't take long to spot her. She was sitting at a table near the back with her boss. They were holding hands, laughing, completely unaware that I was watching them. It felt like a knife in my chest. I pulled out my phone and took a picture of them. I don't even know why I did it, maybe to prove to myself that it was real, that I wasn't imagining things. Then I drove away, sitting in my car, staring at the picture of my wife with another man. A wave of emotions hit me. Anger, sadness, disbelief. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to face her, how to confront her. So I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I opened our family group chat and sent the picture. Just the picture with a simple caption. "Glad you're enjoying girls' dinner?" Then I turned off my phone and drove to my brother's house. I wasn't ready to deal with the fallout. I couldn't face it yet. That night, I lay awake in my brother's guest room, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how my life had fallen apart so quickly. I had always thought of myself as a good husband, a good father, but now I wasn't so sure. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, my family, felt like a lie. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't. After I sent the photo to the family group chat and turned off my phone, I drove aimlessly for a while before finally pulling into my brother's driveway. It was late, but he let me in without asking too many questions. He could tell something was wrong. I guess it was written all over my face. I didn't tell him everything. I just said I needed a place to crash for the night. He offered me a beer, but I wasn't in the mood. I just wanted to be alone. I spent the night on his couch, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. My mind was racing, replaying everything that had happened in the past few hours. I couldn't stop thinking about seeing them together in the restaurant. The way Linda smiled at her boss, the way they leaned in close, holding hands like teenagers in love. It made me sick. How long had this been going on? How had I been so blind? And then there was Betty and Maria. The way they lied to me so casually, like it was nothing. I raised them to be honest, to have integrity, yet here they were, helping their mother cover up an affair. It felt like a betrayal on an entirely different level. The next morning, I finally turned my phone back on. It immediately lit up with notifications, texts, missed calls, voicemails. Linda had called me dozens of times, and Betty and Maria had texted me as well. I didn't have the strength to go through everything at once, so I skimmed through the messages. Linda's messages were exactly what I expected. "Please call me. I can explain. It's not what you think. We need to talk." I couldn't bring myself to listen to her voicemails. I knew hearing her voice would only make me angrier. Maria's messages were different. She sent me text after text, apologizing profusely. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I never should have lied to you. I hate myself for what I did. Please don't hate me. Can we please talk?" I'm so scared I've ruined everything. She even had her boyfriend, Josh, text me. Hey, this is Josh. Maria's really upset and having a panic attack. She's scared you'll never forgive her. Please call her. I didn't reply to any of them. I didn't know what to say. Betty, on the other hand, was a different story. Her text was short and cold. Dad, I'm sorry you found out this way, but I think you're overreacting. Don't throw away a good marriage over one mistake. Overreacting? One mistake? My blood boiled. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a full-blown betrayal, not only by Linda, but by Betty and Maria too. They had lied to me. They had helped their mother cover up something that completely shattered our family. I couldn't help but replay all the times they must have lied to my face. Every time I asked about their plans, they'd tell me they were going to dinner, knowing full well what Linda was really doing. They'd smile at me, acting like everything was normal, all while hiding the truth. I spent most of the day stewing in my anger and heartbreak. My brother tried to talk to me, but I wasn't ready to open up yet. I needed time to process everything. By the afternoon, I realized I couldn't let this go without saying something. I started by texting Maria. Maria, I love you, but what you've done has hurt me deeply. I need space to figure things out. She replied almost instantly. I'm so sorry, Dad. I'll never forgive myself for this. I love you so much. I didn't respond. Then, I texted Betty. Betty, this isn't a mistake. This is a betrayal from my entire family. Please don't contact me until I'm ready to talk. She didn't reply, but I knew she must have shown Linda because, shortly after, Linda started texting me again. Don't take this out on the girls. They were just trying to protect me. They didn't mean to hurt you. I ignored her. I wasn't interested in excuses. Later that evening, I finally told my brother the full story. I showed him the messages, the photo, everything. He was furious on my behalf. You need to cut them all off, he said. They clearly don't respect you. Why should you keep them in your life? His words hit me hard because deep down, I knew he was right. But cutting off my daughters? That was a step I wasn't sure I could take. That night, I started thinking about what came next. I knew my marriage to Linda was over. There was no coming back from this, and honestly, I didn't even want to try. But what about Betty and Maria? Could I ever trust them again? Could I ever look at them the same way, knowing what they did? I decided I needed time. Time to think, time to process, time to figure out how to move forward. But one thing was certain. My life, as I knew it, was over. The fallout didn't hit like an explosion. It lingered, a slow, suffocating burn. By the time I got back to my brother's place that evening, I wasn't angry anymore. I was numb. All the emotions I had felt earlier, the rage, the disbelief, the heartbreak, had given way to a dull, crushing weight in my chest. It felt like the life I had built, the one I thought was solid, was crumbling, and all I could do was watch. The first thing I noticed when I turned on my phone was the silence. Earlier, it had been full of frantic notifications, missed calls, and texts. But now, there was nothing. No more desperate messages from Maria. No follow-ups from Betty. No voice messages from Linda. It was like they had finally realized I wasn't going to respond and had given up, or maybe they were regrouping. Who knows? Either way, the silence was unsettling. The quiet gave me time to think, and that wasn't a good thing. When the anger faded, all that was left was the hurt. The questions that kept swirling in my mind like a tornado. How long had this been going on? How many times had Linda lied to my face? Did Betty and Maria ever feel guilty about what they were doing? Or was this just normal for them? Betraying their father to protect their mother? That night, after hours of silence and stewing in my thoughts, I finally sat down with my brother in his living room. I knew I couldn't carry this weight alone anymore, so I decided to tell him everything, to finally let it all out. I needed someone to hear me, to listen without judgment, even if there was nothing anyone could do to fix it. I sat across from him, my hands trembling slightly as I began. The weight of the betrayal felt heavy on my chest, but I pushed through. I found something on Linda's phone. I started, my voice steady but thick with emotion. Text messages, lies. I couldn't ignore it, and it led me to something else. My brother didn't interrupt, just gave me a nod, silently urging me to keep going. I told him everything. The text between Linda and her boss, the lies Betty and Maria had told me, the way they'd all covered up what Linda was doing. I even told him about the picture I'd taken of Linda and her boss at the restaurant, how I just stood there watching them, the feeling in my gut sinking deeper with every passing second. I couldn't take it anymore, I said, swallowing hard. I sent the picture to the family group chat. I didn't even care anymore. I just needed them to know. to see what was really going on. My brother leaned back in his chair, rubbing his face, a deep frown forming on his face. I could see the anger in his eyes as he processed what I just said. He didn't speak right away, just let the silence hang between us. "That's messed up," he finally said, his voice tight with frustration. "I don't even know where to start. I mean, I always thought Linda was, a little too polished, too perfect, but I didn't think she'd do something like this. And the girls, man," he shook his head, his voice quiet with disbelief. "I don't know. It's low." His words, though filled with anger, gave me a small sense of relief. I needed to hear that I wasn't going crazy, that I wasn't losing my mind. It wasn't just me seeing things through a fog of rage and confusion. Someone else saw it too. But even though he was angry on my behalf, it didn't make the situation any easier. It didn't take away the pain, the betrayal. My brother's anger was helpful for a moment, but it was mine that had been festering for hours. "I don't know what to do, man," I admitted, my voice breaking slightly. "I can't even look at them the same way anymore. I don't even want to go back to that house. I feel like everything's falling apart. My marriage is over, and now, I can't even trust my daughters. They lied to me. They helped her cover it all up." My brother stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the wheels turning in his head, trying to figure out what to say, how to help. He wasn't sure either. "You need to cut them all off," he said finally, his voice low but firm. "They clearly don't respect you. Why should you keep them in your life?" His words hit hard, and I felt a stab of guilt. Could I really cut them out like that? Could I just walk away from my family? It felt impossible. But deep down, I knew he was right. They had all betrayed me in different ways. The trust one once had in them was shattered beyond repair. "I don't know," I muttered, feeling defeated. "Cutting them off. I'm not sure I can do that. Not with Betty and Maria. They're still my daughters." My brother nodded, understanding, but the frustration was still clear in his face. "I get it," he said, "but you can't let them walk all over you. Not like this. You need to take a step back and think about what's best for you. What about you, man? What are you going to do?" I didn't have an answer. Not yet, anyway. I had so many questions swirling in my head, so many emotions crashing against each other. I didn't even know where to start. I need time," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need time to think, to figure this all out. I can't just go back to normal like nothing happened. This isn't just a mistake. It's betrayal. And I don't know how to handle that." My brother didn't offer me any easy solutions. He didn't tell me what to do. He just sat with me, letting the silence settle, understanding that there was nothing to fix right away. It wasn't about finding an immediate answer. It was about giving myself the space to process what had happened, to figure out where to go from here. The next morning, I decided it was time to stop wallowing in my anger and start taking action. The first thing I needed to do was get my finances in order. I couldn't afford to focus on the emotional mess if I didn't protect myself first. So, I spent the majority of the day canceling joint accounts, transferring money into a separate account Linda couldn't touch, and securing anything that could be at risk in the divorce. I wasn't going to let her use my grief as an opportunity to catch me off guard. But it wasn't just about Linda. As I reviewed my accounts, I couldn't stop thinking about the tens of thousands of dollars I had spent, money I had saved up for Betty's wedding. All that money, gone. For a daughter who had lied to my face and helped her mother betray me. The thought made me sick to my stomach. I made a note to discuss this with my lawyer. Maybe I couldn't get that money back, but I sure as hell wasn't going to spend another cent on them. By the afternoon, I felt ready to move on to the next step. I called a lawyer. Actually, I called several. My brother had advised me to meet with a few before making a choice. So, I spent the rest of the day in law offices, retelling my story to strangers who tried their hardest to stay professional, but I could see the judgment in their eyes. By the end of the day, I had made my decision. I picked someone who was tough, smart, and most importantly, aggressive. I told her I wanted the divorce to be quick and clean, but I also wanted to make sure Linda didn't get anything she didn't deserve. She reassured me, claiming she had handled plenty of cases like this. While it didn't completely ease my mind, at least I felt like I was in capable hands. That night, as I sat alone in my brother's guest room, I started thinking about what I would say to Linda. I hadn't confronted her yet, mostly because I didn't trust myself to stay calm, and because I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of an explanation. What could she possibly say that would make any of this okay? But I knew I couldn't avoid her forever. Eventually, I'd have to face her, and when that moment came, I wanted to be prepared. I couldn't let myself get drawn into her excuses or her tears. I needed to stay focused and remind myself of why I was doing this. So, I wrote everything down, the questions I wanted to ask, the points I needed to make, all the emotions I hadn't yet processed. I wasn't sure if I'd actually say everything I'd written, but putting it on paper gave me a sense of control, like I wasn't just a passive victim in all of this. The hardest part, though, was thinking about Betty and Maria. I hadn't spoken to them since sending those texts, and I wasn't sure I could. How do you talk to your daughters after learning they've been lying to you for months? How do you even begin to rebuild trust after something like that? I wanted to believe Maria's apologies were sincere, that she was truly sorry for her role in all of this, but how could I trust her? How could I believe anything she said after everything I'd uncovered? And Betty, her cold, dismissive response cut me to the core. I'd always known she was closer to Linda, but I never imagined she'd take her side in something this serious. It felt like she had made her choice, and it wasn't me. That night, I made another decision. I wasn't going to reach out to them. If they wanted to fix things, they'd have to come to me. I wasn't going to chase after them, begging for their forgiveness or explanations. They made their choices, and now they had to live with the consequences. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt a strange sense of calm for the first time since everything had exploded. I didn't feel completely lost anymore. I had a plan. It wasn't perfect, and it wouldn't fix everything, but it was a start. I was done being the victim. From now on, I was going to take control. After 2 days of hiding out in my brother's guest room, dodging calls and sorting through my emotions, I knew it was time to face Linda. Avoiding her wouldn't change anything, and I had things I needed to say. Things she needed to hear. I sent her a text late that night. We need to talk tomorrow at 10 a.m. at the house. She replied almost immediately. I'll be there. Please just let me explain. I couldn't believe her audacity. Explain what? I thought. There was nothing left to explain. I wasn't interested in her excuses or half-hearted justifications, but I didn't reply. I'd save that for when we were face to face. The next morning, I woke up early, barely able to sleep. I drove to the house, the place that used to be our home. As soon as I stepped inside, I was hit with a wave of nostalgia mixed with bitterness. This was where we'd built our life, where we'd raised our kids, celebrated holidays, and made memories. Now it felt like a hollow shell, tainted by everything that had come to light. Linda showed up right on time. She walked in nervously, her eyes red and puffy like she hadn't slept in days. She was holding her phone like a shield, and I noticed immediately that she wasn't wearing her wedding ring. That detail hit me harder than I expected. Thanks for agreeing to meet, she said softly, standing just inside the door as if she were afraid to come closer. Don't thank me, I replied, my voice colder than I intended. I'm not here to make things easier for you. That seemed to set the tone for the conversation. We sat down at the dining room table, the same table where we'd shared so many family meals. Linda started talking, her voice trembling, going through the motions, saying all the things I expected to hear. It wasn't serious. It didn't mean anything. It was a mistake. She kept repeating herself, cycling through the same tired excuses, as if saying them over and over would somehow make them true. Stop, I said, my patience running thin. I don't want to hear excuses. I want answers. She looked at me, confused, as if she didn't understand what I was asking. How long? I demanded. She hesitated, clearly trying to figure out what would be the best answer. A few months, she said, her voice faltering. Try again. I spat, fury rising in my chest. Her face crumpled as she realized she couldn't lie her way out of this. Almost a year, she whispered, barely audible. A year. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I clenched my fist under the table, trying desperately to keep my anger in check. An entire year of lies. My voice shook with rage. A year of you pretending everything was fine, all while you were screwing around behind my back. She flinched, but I couldn't bring myself to feel any sympathy. How could I? How many times had she smiled at me, kissed me, told me she loved me, all while sneaking around behind my back? I couldn't wrap my head around it. How long have they known? I demanded, my voice tight. Linda winced, her eyes darting away. Not the whole time, she mumbled. A couple of months ago? I pressed, unable to keep my disgust out of my voice. I didn't want to drag them into this, but you did. I interrupted sharply. You made them part of your lies. Do you have any idea what that's done to me? She didn't respond. Instead, she started crying, full-on sobbing, as if that would somehow make it all better. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, she sobbed. I never wanted to hurt you, but I was so unhappy. Unhappy? My voice echoed in the empty house. growing louder with each word. You were unhappy, so you decided to blow up our family? You were unhappy, so you cheated on me and dragged our daughters into your mess? Do you have any idea what you've done, Linda? She just sat there, crying into her hands, unable to respond. And for the first time, I didn't feel sorry for her. You've ruined everything, I said, quieter now, the weight of it all sinking in. Not just our marriage, but my relationship with Betty and Maria. How am I supposed to trust them after this? How am I supposed to look at them and not see this betrayal? I didn't want them to lie to you, she whispered through her tears. I didn't want any of this. Then why did you do it? I shot back, frustration building again. Why didn't you come to me? If you were so unhappy, why didn't you try to fix things instead of sneaking around behind my back? She didn't answer. Maybe she didn't have one, or maybe she thought whatever she said wouldn't change what had already been done. After a long silence, I stood up, the decision finally clear. I'm filing for divorce, I said, my voice calm but firm. You'll hear from my lawyer soon. Please don't do this, she begged, standing up, her voice pleading. We can work through this. We can fix it. There's nothing to fix, I snapped, my voice cold. You made your choice and now I'm making mine. Before I walked out, I turned to face her one last time. By the way, don't expect me to pay for Betty's wedding anymore. She can ask her boss to foot the bill since you two are so good at keeping secrets. Her face crumpled again, but I didn't stick around to see her reaction. As I walked through the house and out the door, I paused in the hallway, staring at the family photos on the wall. There we were, me, Linda, Betty, and Maria, smiling like the perfect family. I used to love those photos, but now they felt like a cruel joke. I grabbed the nearest one, a picture from Betty's high school graduation, and smashed it against the wall. The glass shattered, and for a brief moment, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. But it didn't last. As I walked to my car, something hit me. This was just the beginning. The confrontation with Linda was over, but the real battle was still ahead. I still had to face Betty and Maria. I still had to figure out how to move forward. And I still had to confront the painful reality that the life I thought I had, the life I'd spent nearly 30 years building, was gone. The confrontation with Linda had cleared the air, but it hadn't made things easier. If anything, it made the betrayal feel more real, more weighty. The anger I felt toward Linda was sharp, but it was focused. I knew what she had done and why. And now, I was walking away. The situation with Betty and Maria was far more complicated. They were my daughters, my flesh and blood, but they had chosen her. The day after I told Linda I was filing for divorce, I decided to meet with Betty and Maria separately. I couldn't just ignore them, and I wasn't ready to completely cut them off without at least hearing them out. But I knew this wasn't going to be some casual chat. The trust between us was shattered, and I needed to know if there was anything left to salvage. I started with Maria. She'd always been the more emotional one, and her texts over the past few days had been frantic, bordering on desperate. I asked her to meet me at a park near my brother's house. When she arrived, it was obvious she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were puffy, and she kept nervously fidgeting with her hands. As soon as we sat down on a bench, she burst into tears. "Dad, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to hurt you." I gritted my teeth, trying to keep my anger in check, but it was hard. "Then why did you lie to me?" I demanded, my voice sharp. "Why did you cover for your mother? Did you think I wouldn't find out?" She wiped her eyes, looking guilty and lost. "It wasn't like that," she said quickly. "She told me about it a couple of months ago. I was mad at her, but she begged me not to say anything. She said she'd end it soon, that it was just a phase." I didn't know what to do. My fists clenched. "You didn't know what to do? You knew it was wrong, but you chose to protect her. You betrayed me, Maria. You stood by her and lied to my face." She shook her head, her sobs coming faster now. "I didn't want to hurt you, Dad. I swear." I leaned forward, my voice low but seething. "You already did. You both did. And now, I have to deal with the wreckage. All the lies, the deceit, and the fact that my own daughters turned their back on me." I stared at Maria, struggling to process her words. "So, you decided to protect her instead of telling me the truth?" I demanded. She looked down, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought she was going to stop. I didn't want to blow up the family if there was a chance she'd fix things. I didn't know it would get this far. "That's not good enough, Maria." I shot back, my voice cold. "You don't get to excuse what you did by saying you didn't know. You knew she was cheating. You knew she was lying to me, and you went along with it. Do you have any idea how that makes me feel?" She broke down again, her face buried in her hands. I felt a pang of guilt watching her cry, but I pushed it down. This wasn't about sympathy. It was about the damage they'd all done to my trust. I'm not saying this to punish you, I said, my voice steady but sharp. But I need you to understand how deeply this has hurt me. Right now, I don't know if I can trust you. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you the way I used to. Maria nodded, her shoulders shaking. I'll do anything to fix this, Dad. Anything. Just tell me what to do. I didn't have an answer for her. I told her I needed time to think, then I left, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. Meeting with Betty was a completely different experience. I asked her to meet me at a coffee shop, thinking it would be better to talk in a neutral space. She showed up 10 minutes late, looking polished and composed, as if nothing had happened. That alone rubbed me the wrong way. Thanks for meeting me, she said, sitting down casually. I didn't waste any time. Betty, why didn't you tell me about your mother's affair? I demanded, my voice tense. She sighed, leaning back in her chair as if she was too calm. Dad, I didn't want to get involved. It's between you and Mom. I thought it was better to stay out of it. Stay out of it? I snapped, leaning forward. I repeated myself, my voice rising with frustration. You didn't stay out of it, Betty. You lied to me. You covered for her. That's not staying out of it. That's choosing a side. I wasn't choosing sides, she shot back defensively. I was trying to keep the peace. I didn't want to make things worse. Worse for who? I demanded, my anger boiling over. For me? Or for your mother? She didn't answer, and that told me everything I needed to know. Betty, you're an adult, I said, my voice steady but laced with anger. You're getting married soon. If your fiancé did to you what your mother did to me, would you want everyone around you to lie and protect him? Or would you want someone to stand up and tell you the truth? That's different, she said, clearly annoyed. Mom made a mistake. It doesn't mean you have to throw everything away. Her words hit me like a slap in the face. A mistake? Is that what you think this is? She did not make a mistake. She betrayed me day in and day out. It is a mistake, she said firmly, her tone growing more defensive. People make mistakes, Dad. You don't have to burn everything to the ground because of one bad choice. One bad choice. I repeated, shaking my head in disbelief. Do you even hear yourself? This wasn't a bad choice. It was a betrayal, by your mother, by you, by Maria. And you're sitting here acting like I'm the one overreacting. I'm not saying that, she quickly responded, her voice softening. I just think you're being too harsh. You're hurt, I get that, but you'll regret cutting us out later. We're your family. Family doesn't lie to each other, I said, my voice tight with anger. Family doesn't cover for someone who's tearing everything apart. You and Maria didn't just lie to me. You broke my trust. And right now, I don't see how I can move past that. She crossed her arms, looking frustrated. So what? You're just going to disown us? Pretend we don't exist? I am not going to pretend. I will cut you out of my life. We sat in silence for a few minutes. The weight of it all hung in the air. Finally, I stood up. I've said what I needed to say, I told her. I really hope you never find yourself in the same situation like me. She didn't try to stop me as I walked out. That night, I sat alone in my brother's guest room, replaying both conversations in my mind. Maria seemed genuinely remorseful, but I wasn't sure if I could ever fully forgive her. Betty, on the other hand, was a different story. Her refusal to acknowledge the seriousness of what she'd done made it clear that she didn't think she was in the wrong. For the first time, I seriously considered cutting them both out of my life. It wasn't a decision I wanted to make, but the thought of trying to rebuild a relationship with people who had betrayed me so deeply felt impossible. That night, I made my decision. The next morning, I called my lawyer. I told her to revise my will. Betty and Maria were to be removed as beneficiaries. Everything, my savings, my retirement fund, the house, would go to my sister and her kids. They had always been there for me, and I knew they wouldn't betray me like my own daughters had. When I told my brother, he didn't try to talk me out of it. You're doing the right thing, he said. They made their choices. Now they can live with the consequences. The fallout was immediate. The next day, Maria called me, her voice a mess of hysterical sobs. Dad, please don't do this, she begged. I know I messed up, but I love you. I don't care about the money. I just don't want to lose you. Her words hit me harder than I expected, but I didn't let it sway me. Maria, I'll always love you, I said, my voice firm. But love doesn't mean I can forget what you did. I need time. Maybe someday we can rebuild our relationship, but right now, I can't have you in my life. She kept crying, but I held my ground until she finally hung up. Betty, predictably, took a different approach. She sent me a long email, accusing me of being petty and vindictive. "You're punishing me for trying to keep the peace," she wrote. "I'm just trying to avoid conflict, and now you're ruining my wedding over something that has nothing to do with me." I didn't bother responding. There was no point. Then Linda tried to intervene. She sent me an email, the tone polished, carefully constructed, like she thought I'd fall for it. She begged me not to cut the girls out of my will, claiming it wasn't fair to punish them for mistakes she made. She even had the audacity to suggest that removing them would irreparably damage the family. "You're really going to play that card?" I muttered to myself, rolling my eyes as I read her email. I didn't bother responding to Linda either. She could try all she wanted, but I knew the truth now. The days passed, and slowly, I started to feel lighter. The anger was still there, but the suffocating weight of the betrayal wasn't as overwhelming anymore. Cutting ties hadn't been easy, but it was necessary. I needed to protect myself, emotionally, not just financially. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. It's been a month now since I cut Betty and Maria out of my will. I haven't heard from them directly, and I'm fine with that. I've heard from mutual friends that Betty is scrambling to find the money to cover the wedding expenses I'd been paying for. I don't feel a damn bit sorry for her. She made her choice when she sided with her mother, and now she's dealing with the consequences. Betty's marriage crumbled just as swiftly as mine had, though in a cruel twist, it mirrored my own experience. It wasn't long after the wedding that her husband, Greg, started showing signs of trouble. At first, Betty dismissed it. Work stress, long hours, all the usual excuses. But when Greg's behavior became impossible to ignore, Betty finally confronted him. The truth spilled out, and it was even uglier than she imagined. Greg had been cheating on her for months. Betty, devastated and betrayed, found out the hard way, through a text message he'd carelessly left on his phone. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. She was no stranger to betrayal, but the depth of it, coming from her own husband, shook her to the core. She demanded answers, but Greg was evasive and defensive, barely offering a word of regret. He claimed it was a mistake, a momentary lapse, but Betty knew it wasn't just that. It was a pattern, a betrayal that went beyond just sex. It was the betrayal of trust, of her heart. Divorce was inevitable. Betty couldn't bring herself to stay with a man who destroyed what little was left of their bond. As the proceedings began, Greg did everything he could to make things as ugly as possible. He fought for half of everything, though Betty had nothing left to give. She felt the weight of the irony. A woman who had spent years protecting a man who lied to her, only to end up with nothing but pain and broken dreams. As for me, the divorce had been a long, drawn-out nightmare. After everything I'd been through, I knew I couldn't repeat the same mistakes. I had to make sure I was financially free from Linda, free from everything she had taken from me. I signed over everything I had to my sister and her kids. The house, my savings, my retirement. I couldn't bear to leave Linda or my daughters a single dime of what I had worked for all these years. They didn't deserve it. Linda certainly didn't. But the real sting came when Betty asked for help. She came to me, her eyes swollen from crying, asking if I could help her with the divorce. I had nothing to give. Nothing. I'd given it all away. There was no house, no money, no safety net left. The silence between us in that moment was deafening. I wanted to reach out, to help her, but I couldn't. I couldn't afford to. And the bitterness in my chest grew as I realized, in the end, that everything, every penny, every bit of what I had worked for, was gone. My marriage to Linda had left me with nothing but the shattered pieces of a life that once felt whole. Now, I was living with the consequences of my decisions, and I couldn't help Betty in the same way I once had. I could only watch as she went through the same pain I had, trapped in a web of lies and betrayal. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
My world shattered, I discovered shocking proof of my wife brazenly cheating on me in my own car. My name is Ron, and I've been happily married to Lily for 15 years. Our family is a huge source of happiness for me, and I can really feel how much my wife loves me. Our marriage has grown in a way that makes me very happy. We're parents to 2 fantastic daughters in their early teens. Both of us have steady jobs. I work at a security company, and Lily is a voice translator at a film studio. We're healthy and live in a beautiful house in a nice area of the city. Life is great, and I don't think it could be any better. After our younger daughter was born, Lily gained some weight. However, her beautiful blue eyes, which stand out more behind her glasses, She doesn't use contact lenses because they bother her eyes when she reads or does paperwork, make her even more attractive. I'm deeply in love with Lily, and I know she loves me just as much. We have 2 amazing daughters, a comfortable house, and we don't worry about money. Everything was perfect in my life. But then, something bad happened after 15 years of marriage that could change everything and ruin my once perfect and happy life. Lately, Lily began a routine of hanging out with her women colleagues at various bars every other Friday. They rotate among 3 or 4 places they like. She goes out these Fridays to chat and relax after work, as she often tells me. I'm okay with her going out by herself. I get home by 4:30 every day to look after our daughters. When she's out with her colleagues on those nights, I make dinner for the girls and help them with homework, which I really enjoy. She typically gets back by 8, and then we spend the whole weekend together doing fun family activities and eating out with our daughters on Saturday night. But in recent months, she's been getting home later, around 10, on these girls' nights, and I've noticed she's had a few drinks. I didn't bring it up because she's still the same affectionate wife she's always been. Every time she returns from those nights out, she has this special smile that makes me want to hug her. I understand that her time with friends is her way to unwind and forget about a tough work week. I convinced myself it was just harmless fun with her colleagues, even if she started coming home later than before. Then, a few weeks ago, on a Monday morning, I received an email from someone who signed it as a friend. I almost deleted the message without reading it, but I decided to give it a second thought. The email said they were at the Black Crow last Friday and saw Lily enjoying herself with a group, especially dancing with a man from her group. They attached a picture taken with their cell phone, asking me to examine it closely. This email had already planted doubts in my mind, and I feared what I might find out. Despite knowing Lily danced during these outings, the email mentioned male co-workers, something she never told me. I always thought it was only her female friends. Even though she could have been dancing with someone already at the Black Crow, not part of their group, a lump formed in my throat, and I started feeling uneasy about the whole situation. Despite my reservations, I opened the attachment. The moment the picture appeared, I noticed it wasn't perfectly centered, suggesting the photographer was cautious to avoid being seen. I observed my wife's co-workers, both male and female, sitting at a long table in the background. The picture was somewhat blurry, but I could still make out my wife on the right side of the dance floor. She wore her beige blouse with red flowers and green leaves along with matching brown slacks, the same outfit from her last girls' night out. So I deduced the picture was taken the previous Friday when she arrived home later than usual at 10:30. Giving me a hug and her usual smile. In the photo, she was on the dance floor with a tall young man, embracing tightly with both arms around his neck. To say I was shocked would be an understatement. I couldn't recall ever dancing like that with Lily or any other girl in public. The man's lower body pressed tightly against her, and it seemed she could feel his hardness rubbing against her. He had to be aroused, as it's impossible not to be in that situation. Strangely, Lily didn't seem bothered. On the contrary, she appeared happy, pushing herself against him as they locked eyes. My wife, the mother of my daughters, was in the arms of a stranger, behaving provocatively in public. I couldn't believe what I saw. She wouldn't dance with me like that in public. Why was she letting a stranger act this way? Or was he truly a stranger? Doubt firmly took hold in my mind and grew fast beyond my control. Various scenarios of my wife with other men played out, making me feel sick. I rushed to the bathroom where I threw up my breakfast. Lily, my wife, was acting inappropriately in public. Was she having an affair? How could she do this to me and our 2 daughters? Many questions flooded my mind. Who was that man? Did they work together? How long had this been happening? Why was she involved with him? Update: for the next 30 minutes, I stayed in my office bathroom trying to clear my thoughts. Gradually, new emotions started emerging: disappointment, sadness, and anger, followed by a strong desire for revenge. A range of intense emotions took over me, creating a whirlwind of reactions. I felt the urge to kick Lily, to hug her and ask her to stop, or even to consider divorcing her. Then, a moment later, I'd think of forgiving her and giving her another chance. As I sat on the toilet, I thought I was losing my mind. Eventually, I regained control, deciding to do nothing but wait and watch Lily before taking any action. Making emotionally influenced decisions without knowing the full truth wouldn't make sense. I needed to wait and not tell her about what I already knew. Simultaneously, I was determined to get to the bottom of it all. One way or another, I had to get solid proof of what was going on. Was she cheating on me, or was she just having exaggerated fun? However, I already knew she had lied by omitting the whole truth about her evenings out with the girls. Her movie studio was only a couple of blocks away from my workplace. Since I was often on the road for work, checking on Lily was easy. The next day at 11:30, I parked at the end of her workplace's parking lot, feeling relatively safe with tinted windows. I watched the exit door until 1, but she never came out. I repeated this for the rest of the week, and on Friday at 12:15, I saw Lily and 3 others, a woman and 2 men, get into a black BMW. Lily sat in front, next to the driver, and they drove away. Naturally, I followed them. They drove downtown, entered the parking lot of a fancy restaurant, and I observed them laughing as they went inside. Parked in front of the restaurant, I stayed in my car until they came out at 2. Lily walked next to the tall, light-haired man, the driver, the same man she had been dancing with in the photo I already had. She seemed very cheerful and excited, touching his arms as they talked. This, more than anything else, angered me. They drove back to her workplace and all went inside. So far, Lily hadn't done anything wrong except for not mentioning to me that she sometimes went out to eat with both male and female co-workers. More importantly, the 4 of them at lunch acted as if they were 2 couples, not friends or co-workers. And that bothered me the most. That Friday, Lily didn't go out with the girls after work and got home at 5:15, cheerful and smiling as usual. It took a lot of willpower to control myself and not bombard her with questions. However, I asked her once, while quietly sitting in front of the television after supper, if she had a good day at work, and then I inquired about her lunch. For a few seconds, I noticed she didn't know exactly what to say, but soon enough, she told me she ate the tuna sandwich she had prepared before leaving for work in the morning. Calling her a liar and maybe a cheater, I told myself. Lily was looking at me with those big blue eyes that I love so much as she told that blatant lie. Although my anger was building, I still felt an urge to reach out and hug her. Of course, being in love with someone does that. I knew I had to control myself or risk doing something I might regret afterward. Instead of asking her more questions, I decided to change the subject and talk about my day at work, trying to act as I usually did. That weekend, Lily probably didn't realize we were facing a significant issue. Later that night, we were close twice, and she behaved like the affectionate wife she always had been. On Saturday, we took our daughters to the zoo, had a great family time, and for a brief moment, I forgot about the events of the past week. I didn't bother checking on her at noon for the rest of the week because I intended to follow her on Friday evening after work. On that Friday, when my 2 daughters arrived home at 4:15, I was already there waiting for them. After ordering pizza, I explained that I had to go to the office and would be home later in the evening. They were old enough to take care of themselves, and it didn't bother me to leave them alone in the house as long as they locked the door. I knew they would be in their room by the time I returned. At exactly 5, I got into my car and drove to Lily's workplace. I observed her getting into her car, and as she left the parking lot, she turned away from our home, heading to a pub for her evening out with the girls. I had no trouble following her, as there was a convoy of 6 cars between my SUV and her Toyota, all driving in the same direction towards a pub, watering hole, or a dance hall, whatever you want to call it. 10 minutes later, I saw Lily's Toyota and the other 6 cars entering the parking lot next to a combination bar restaurant called the Glass Shoe. I stayed in my car, parked at the other end. When everyone was inside, I got out and walked around the place to learn more about where she was going. The pub was relatively distant from other buildings, surrounded by parking spaces. 2 sides bordered streets, and the other 2 were defined by a well-trimmed 5ft high cedar hedge, in front of which were parking spaces. I noticed the black BMW from the convoy, which Lily had gotten into for the restaurant the previous Friday. It was now parked separately in front of the cedar hedge, away from the other cars. I observed separate sets of doors, one for the restaurant and another for the bar. There were fire doors at the back for both, but those were for emergencies only. Another entrance on the other side, where most cars were parked, also led to the bar. However, Lily's group had entered through the door for the restaurant part of the building. I returned to my car and began changing into clothes I had brought for the occasion. I wore a baseball cap and a black windbreaker. Then I added a pair of glasses to my disguise. To change my facial features somewhat, I inserted a protective denture into my mouth, similar to those worn by boxers. I knew I would have a hard time talking and drinking with this, but I didn't care since it was not my intention to get into a discussion or get drunk. Looking in the rear-view mirror, I knew that no one would recognize me. I waited another hour in my car before entering the bar. The group, including my wife, was seated together near the dance floor, drinking and having fun. Seeing Lily sitting close to the same guy she had gone to eat with the previous Friday saddened and disappointed me. I suspected that something might be going on between them. I picked a table at the back, far from them, to quietly observe. The section where I sat was dimmer. There were a couple of lonely souls like me drowning their sorrows. I knew no one would pay attention to me there. Soon the music started, and people moved to the dance floor. I noticed Lily dancing with the guy who sat next to her. The other 3 guys at their table had weird smiles, watching them dance. It was clear Lily and that guy were a couple, catching everyone's attention. After a couple of hours, only Lily, another girl, and 2 men remained. The rest had left. Both couples were on the dance floor, and my wife had her arms around the guy. It was evident they were lovers. He had his hands on Lily's waist, and they barely moved on the dance floor, just standing and rubbing against each other. Then I saw him kiss her and say something in her ear. I watched her nod, and they left the building holding hands. I followed them. It was already quite dark outside. I saw them walk hand in hand to his car, parked in the last row of the parking lot near the cedar hedge. He knew they wouldn't be bothered there, with no other cars nearby and the hedge at the back. What were they planning? How far would Lily let it go? I needed to find out. Carefully, I walked to the other end of the parking lot and then toward the cedar hedge. Staying close to the 5 feet high hedge, I walked toward their car, hiding behind parked cars. Soon, I stood by the back of his BMW. At first, I saw no one inside due to the darkness. As I moved closer, attempting to look inside, the deeply tinted windows revealed nothing, but I heard muffled voices. Feeling desperate, I debated whether to intervene or wait to catch Lily in the act. After a brief moment, the decision was no longer mine. When I noticed the car shaking rhythmically, the guy was fooling around with my wife. I couldn't contain my rage. I yanked the door open, flooding the car with light, revealing my wife, Lily, lying on her back with her lover on top of her, caught red-handed. Having removed my disguise, Lily's eyes met mine, her expression shifting from bliss to shock in seconds. She mumbled an apology, urging me not to act rashly. Then, with urgency, she declared it meant nothing and asked me to wait for her, claiming she was going home. Slamming the door shut, I walked away, heading straight to my car. By the time I left the parking lot, Lily was already halfway to me, shouting for me to wait. Update: Lily arrived home less than 5 minutes after I did, appearing disheveled with messy hair and crumpled clothes. Tearfully, she approached me. She expressed deep remorse, apologizing for hurting me and breaking our marriage vows. Lily claimed that had she known I was being betrayed, she could have engaged in similar indiscretions. Despite her pleas, I felt an unexpected surge of anger. Her apologies continued as she insisted that her actions meant nothing to her, professing love for me and emphasizing the importance of our family. Overwhelmed, she cried, hiding her face and eventually sitting on the couch due to shaky legs. Dismissing her apologies, I asserted that what she did to our marriage was unforgivable and demanded to know the identity of the other person and the duration of their affair. I felt a sense of relief as she moved to the couch, removing her from my immediate presence. The urge to physically react to her betrayal lingered. She revealed the man's identity, someone from her workplace, and pleaded for understanding, claiming the affair should never have occurred. Lily justified her actions by pointing to supposed deception during girls' nights over the past 2 years, but insisted it didn't diminish her love for me. Expressing my inability to live with the public nature of her affair, I highlighted the impact on our reputation among co-workers and at social events. Lily begged for forgiveness, vowing that the betrayal would not recur and emphasizing the importance of salvaging our marriage and family. While she continued to speak, I stood up, turning away from her. I decided to leave to give myself time to think. I confronted her about destroying our marriage through her initial infidelity. A sudden cry and loud moan caught my attention, prompting me to look back at Lily on the floor, crying in desperation. Despite the overwhelming urge to comfort her, the anger and sense of betrayal made it clear I couldn't trust myself to stay near her. I silently left the house, spending the night in a hotel room without sleep. The next morning, I called my secretary and informed her I wouldn't be going to work for the day. I stayed in my room until noon. After grabbing a quick bite at the hotel restaurant, I passed by my house on the way to the office. There was a green Toyota in the driveway, which I recognized as Francine's, Lily's sister. At least I thought my daughters had their aunt's company, along with that of my cheating wife, providing a bit of comfort. What I didn't know then was that Lily was in the hospital. After leaving the house the previous evening and explaining the situation to her sister on the phone, Lily had a breakdown. It was only once I reached my office that I got the news. Francine, Lily's sister, called me, and we had a lengthy conversation. She explained that Lily was emotionally distressed and crying constantly. Less than an hour after I left the house the previous evening, my eldest daughter called Francine, saying Lily was delirious and I was not home. Francine then talked to her sister and promptly called an ambulance when she realized Lily's condition. Francine let me know she was still at my house, taking care of my 2 daughters for a few days. She strongly suggested that I visit my wife at Santa Mary's hospital in town. After the call ended, I was beyond shocked. Had I been selfish the previous evening? Did I abandon my family when they needed me the most? Maybe. But one thing was clear. If I stayed in the house with her that evening, there was a chance, however small, that I might have become violent due to what she had done. Yes, she wrecked our marriage, but until yesterday, I didn't see myself as someone who avoided problems. Was that exactly what I had done? Lily and I faced a significant problem, undoubtedly. But was that reason enough for me to abandon my family when they needed me? I felt terrible sitting behind my desk. I started crying, questioning if there could have been another way, a better way, with forgiveness and maybe reconciliation, a slim possibility. Of course, this mess was Lily's doing. She was entirely responsible for giving another man what should have been mine alone. However, breaking my marriage would hurt my 2 daughters too much. There had to be another solution. That's when I thought of forgiveness, with retribution. Once I recovered from the shock of learning about Lily's hospitalization, I got in my car and drove to the hospital. I had no idea what I would say to her, but one thing was certain: I was going to face the situation and find out exactly what she had done. Now I find myself lying in a hospital bed. A thought crosses my mind, recalling something my mother used to say: cheaters always face consequences, one way or another. Ron and I tied the knot when I was 20, and we were genuinely happy. We had 2 amazing daughters, a lovely home, a great neighborhood, and financial stability. More importantly, I loved my husband, and I knew he loved me back. When my youngest daughter turned 6, I landed a job at a film studio near Ron's workplace. With the fall of the Iron Curtain and the gradual democratization of communism, there was a high demand for U.S. films in Ukraine. Being fluent in Ukrainian and having acting experience from university, I secured a position as a female voice translator for English films, translating them into the Ukrainian language. It was a fantastic job with good pay, and I excelled at it. After 5 years, a new voice translator named Victor Dino joined us. He was a tall, attractive man in his late 20s with dark blonde hair. Most girls at the studio had a crush on him, but he seemed oblivious to the attention. Vic, born in the U.S. with Ukrainian-speaking grandparents, was perfectly bilingual. We started working together often, and a deep friendship developed between us. That's when my troubles began. Without realizing it, I found myself thinking I was in love with him. Initially, he treated me like the other girls, discussing work matters, and we worked well together. Eventually, he started joining us on alternate Fridays, and our friendship grew into something deeper. We became more than just colleagues. We became good friends. I confided in him about my life, sharing things I had never told my husband, especially when Vic began joining us at the pubs. My first mistake was not telling Ron that our girls' night out was now mixed. I enjoyed Vic's company and didn't want to share his attention with my husband on those nights. Our friendship turned into something deeper, and we found ourselves dancing together frequently. I didn't realize how far things had gone until one evening, while dancing to a slow song, he kissed me passionately. It wasn't a friendly or family kiss. I was shocked. That's how it all started. The following Friday, he found an excuse to take me out of the pub, and we engaged in intimate moments in his car. From there, our passion escalated, and soon we were engaging in more explicit activities in the backseat of his car. Despite feeling guilty when I got home, I made sure to show Ron the love he deserved. However, I failed to realize that Ron, as my husband, deserved my complete love, and I shouldn't have given any of it to Vic. Working with Vic every day made it impossible to keep away from him. Gradually, even at work, we developed the habit of hugging and kissing when no one was around. From my perspective, this behavior with Vic didn't diminish my love for Ron. I still would have given my life for him, and I had no intention of hurting him with my affair with Vic. I was wrong. Making love with Vic wasn't better than making love with my husband. By the time Ron found out about my affair with Vic, we had been lovers for 4 months. While I didn't love Vic like I loved my husband, the physical aspect was fantastic. The freedom I felt with Vic, not having to restrain myself, made all the difference. When making love with my husband, I had to hold back to avoid him thinking less of me. With Vic, I had no such restrictions, since I didn't care what he thought about me. This was the main reason I did things with Vic that I had never done with my husband. I think Vic and I were really thoughtless and careless in how we behaved in front of our colleagues. Vic didn't care much since he wasn't married. But because of our public behavior, it was only a matter of time before my husband found out about me and Vic from a jealous coworker. We should have been more discreet. Even if Ron never found out about my affair, I now understand it would still have been terribly wrong. The evening Ron caught us was the worst moment of my life. He yelled at me to go to hell and take my lover with me. Just before he turned to leave the car, I knew my marriage was in deep trouble. I even stepped on Vic in my rush to leave his car and catch up with my husband, but I was too late. By the time I was halfway to his car, he was speeding away, leaving me standing there in the middle of the parking lot. Until then, I considered my love for Ron like a fire burning only for him, and I knew he felt the same about me. Then one day, when Vic entered my life and kissed me for the first time, it was like a spark from that fire ignited another fire burning for Vic. These emotions for Vic didn't take anything away from the love I felt for my husband. I convinced myself it was like when my youngest daughter was born. Loving her with all my heart didn't reduce the love I still had for my eldest daughter. It's incredible, the things we tell ourselves to justify our basest urges. Children don't expect a parent to love only them, and we never vow to our children to forsake all others. Yes, the love of a parent for a child is far different from the love one should have for their spouse. But I made sure those thoughts never reached my consciousness while I played games with Vic. I know my husband doesn't see it the same way I did then, and I don't blame him. I understand that if the roles were reversed and he had another woman in his life, I would be devastated. Human thoughts and emotions are mysterious, and sometimes we shouldn't try to reason them. So now, I'm here in a hospital bed. Each time I wake from my dreamless rest, I start thinking about the events of the last few months. I cry and feel sorry for myself. Then the nurse injects me again with something, and I sleep once more. A wonderful sleep that allows me to forget everything. I wish I could never wake up again and find peace with myself. But each time, just before I pass out, I see a picture of Ron and me on our wedding day. Oh God, help me, my children, my husband. I can't leave them. I must fight the urge to hide on the other side. Life is a never-ending combat. My father once told me, if you stop fighting, then you had no right to be living in the first place. I am alive. Ron and my daughters are alive. And I will live also. After all, they are the loves of my life. Yes, I will, for my husband and my family. To me, Vic is just dirt now. He had absolutely no right to be in my life in the first place. If Ron allows me, I will be, once again and for the rest of my life, the faithful wife I used to be. When I wake up, how long in the future, I don't know. But I will come back into my family's world. Of that, I am certain. When I do, the first thing I hope to see is my husband standing there in front of me, so that I can start the difficult task of making it up to him. I don't know how many days I have to stay here in the hospital bed, but I beg everyone to pray for Ron and our daughters.
I'm a disabled veteran who, unfortunately, lost my job due to the ongoing pandemic. As a result, I'm at home while my wife continues to work. Our son was born shortly before COVID appeared, and he's now a year old. During this time, I've taken on all household responsibilities, from cooking and cleaning to doing the laundry, to ensure everything runs smoothly. I've also been looking after our 9-year-old and 1-year-old kids, helping with their schoolwork and preparing their meals. My ex-wife and I had a tough upbringing, and we both wanted to give our children the kind of upbringing we missed out on. However, she had our last child to try to save our relationship, which was failing. I supported her decision to work more for extra income, but when the pandemic started, our financial situation worsened, and we had to move in with my mother to save money and reduce her workload. I didn't know she'd been seeing someone else since March. I began to suspect in April, and by my birthday in May, I was sure. Her infidelity and lack of affection left me feeling completely alone. Now, my kids and I live with my mom, while she moved in with her boyfriend. It's been almost a month, but the pain of separation still lingers. My daughter has distanced herself from her mother, and my son shows no interest in her, not even asking for basic things like milk. They seem to have moved on from the initial pain, but I still feel terribly lonely. It's like walking beside someone, sharing a story, and then turning around to find that they've disappeared. 14 years feel like they've gone to waste. To cope with this, I've focused on training, and am proud to say that I've finally dropped below 200 pounds after many years. Now, my main motivation is to keep moving forward for the sake of my children and deal with my emotions. I've also started writing poetry, but since she kept lying about her ongoing connection with the other person, I realized it's pointless to communicate with her. Despite the lingering pain, I hold hope for the future. Finding a lawyer is tough because my mom has trouble finding someone she can trust. I want to be careful and have full trust in the lawyer's professional abilities. Though my brother and mother have been a tremendous source of support through all my difficulties, I'm seeking advice here. She left me for a colleague, which initially led me to plan a separation agreement and consult a lawyer, but the high cost prevented that. I've taken a positive step by attending consultations for myself and my daughter, which is a good development. To prepare for school, I've decided that she'll study reading and math workbooks to get back on track with her education. Meanwhile, I'm in thought and seeking advice. My soon-to-be ex-wife is currently in a psychiatric hospital, and while I hope for her recovery, I'm not sure it's wise for her to become more involved in our children's lives. She chose her partner over our 9-year-old and 1-year-old kids, and I'm concerned she might do the same with them at 10 and 2. While I initially wanted to support her, I'm now focused on my own recovery and not maintaining contact with her, as her progress could hinder mine. I genuinely want her to get better, but I don't want to be present in this situation. Does that make me a bad person? I refrain from asking about her hospitalization reasons, but based on my past experience as a firefighter, I think it may be related to doing bad things. I plan to start the trial as soon as possible and stay by her side, sincerely hoping for her recovery, but I can't hide my anger at her for putting me in such a difficult situation. My children don't know the current situation, which deeply concerns me. To keep ourselves occupied, I organized a drawing evening, trying to understand why life has to be so tough. I see that our little son has suffered greatly from this ordeal. He's developed separation anxiety, which increases every time his mother visits him. Unfortunately, she doesn't seem to notice these problems appearing suddenly after several weeks of absence. This situation is unbearable, and dealing with it alone is incredibly difficult. I miss the person she used to be, and it's a tough journey. Our daughter still unconditionally follows her mother's example. She admires her and wants to be like her. I understand that she feels some resentment due to the current circumstances, but I can't fully grasp her emotions. Over the past 2 months, my ex has visited them 4 or 5 times, even allowing them to spend the night at her new place. However, her messages to our daughter are one-sided, with all the conversations initiated by her. Upon reflection, I realized that I had overlooked these signs for a long time. It seemed like our daughter constantly showed disinterest, barely noticing my presence and responding with only one word. I chose to ignore this, but now I see that all the signs were there. Her mobile phone was always face down, and she often found excuses to go back to work, showing a lack of interest in communicating with me. During that time, I played the role of a babysitter, while she enjoyed parties and a full-fledged relationship with her boyfriend. I finally realized this on my birthday, when she did absolutely nothing, even though she had always shown care and effort. This led me to start an investigation, and I discovered she had been dating her colleague since March. In February, we went on a family trip, and at that time, I thought everything was fine. But I've learned to trust my instincts and not be blinded by her actions again. Despite this, I genuinely hope she finds well-being and happiness for the sake of our children. I remain committed to prioritizing our children. In an effort to maintain a healthy co-parenting dynamic, I've decided to avoid contact with her and focus solely on our children's issues. Unfortunately, she keeps trying to reach out to me as if nothing has changed. Despite my initial attempts to respond politely, I've become increasingly upset and responded with anger and hostility as I'm not ready to talk to her yet. Before cutting off contact, I frequently sent her photos of our children, hoping she'd understand she was leaving. It appears her relationship with her partner didn't work out as expected, and she's now in the hospital. She wants to play a more active role in our children's lives, but it's challenging since she lives an hour away and has a busy schedule. I used to support her after work, but now I refuse to be her backup. I know my worth, and I deserve more than being someone's second or third choice. Once she emotionally recovers, we can work on a healthy co-parenting dynamic. I won't save her now as I couldn't do it before. After speaking with her hospital doctor, I learned she'll be discharged soon. While I feel guilty, I believe she should find her own way since she chose to leave me and the children. The thought that she might do bad things herself causes me great anxiety, making it hard to breathe. Additionally, my ex's partner in love affairs tried to contact me on Facebook, but I blocked him and took a screenshot as evidence, breaking my rule of no contact just to inform my ex. She showed no interest or concern and didn't feel it was her responsibility to deal with him. Technically, it isn't. I hoped she would resolve this issue on my behalf, but instead, she explained at length how she was trying to improve the situation for the sake of our children. This incident taught me a valuable lesson. Never break the no-contact rule, even if something hurts you. I've done well with this, maintaining a month of no contact. I'm still upset that a certain person is trying to follow me, but honestly, I don't care about him at all. My anger is primarily related to the consequences of my relationship with my ex, and such situations only hinder my progress. I'm consumed by deep anger and resentment towards the woman I once thought I'd love forever. Thoughts of her often visit my mind, and every time they appear, I utter curses after them. I'm not that kind of person, never harboring ill will towards others, but my ex-wife's presence makes me furious. The hardest part is maintaining a facade of consent in front of my children. Though I refrain from mentioning her, there are times when my daughter remembers her name, and in those moments, it takes all my strength not to speak ill of my ex and remain indifferent. I don't want the person she left me for to hinder my progress. While he took my wife, I've firmly decided not to let him obstruct my path. I'm determined to protect my emotional well-being from their interference. Despite them not being very pleasant people, I want them to stay away from me and my children. On weekends, my daughter and I enjoy movie nights, and during the week, my son and I go for daily walks while his sister is at school. Being a dad brings me great joy, but it leaves me with very little time for myself. My days are filled with training, and the only adult I truly trust is my Veterans Affairs consultant. Right now, my main focus is on treating post-traumatic stress disorder. My constant thoughts about my ex make it hard for me to concentrate on my responsibilities, especially in raising our children. It's painful to realize how taken advantage of I feel. In the past, I devoted so much to support her career climb. I was by her side during her long work hours, and even gave her foot massages when she returned. All I'm left with now is a sense of worthlessness, as if my efforts meant nothing. I wonder if others are going through a similar situation, and, if so, how they're managing. Engaging in physical activities like training and kickboxing has provided some relief, though it seems like only a small part of what I need to heal. In an attempt to move forward, I registered on the Match website, even though I recognize that I'm not emotionally ready for a new relationship. Recently, I made the decision to step out of my comfort zone and be more honest with myself. Recovering from infidelity is undoubtedly a tough journey. A few months ago, I came across a book called Stop Being Mr. Nice Guy, which delves into the white knight theory and ways to overcome it. Reflecting on my past actions, I can acknowledge that I fell into some of these traps, but I don't believe that my actions were solely driven by the desire to earn knight points. After my service in the Army, I continued to maintain the uniform and ensure everything was in order. It had become second nature to me, perhaps in the hope of easing my partner's work fatigue even just a little. Ultimately, I've always been someone who likes to solve problems and find solutions, with or without her. I feel that being considerate and helping others ultimately didn't benefit me. I've always been the kind of person who leaves a situation cleaner than I found it. While serving in the fire department, I lived with other guys and learned how to clean up after myself. However, I began to realize that maybe I was too kind. But is it a bad thing to appreciate kindness? Unfortunately, it seems challenging to come across truly kind individuals, but it appears to be common to encounter pain. It's disheartening to see my ex pursuing a new lifestyle, especially when, after just 6 months, she's already seeking full custody of our children and spousal support. I'm eagerly anticipating the upcoming trial. Currently, my primary thoughts revolve around post-traumatic stress disorder, the well-being of our children, and my hidden anger towards my future ex-spouse. While I mainly focus on the first two, I wish for time to pass more quickly. I understand the importance of being present in the moment, but it's tough for me to shake off this feeling of emptiness within. Recently, my wife told me that our daughter had expressed an interest in self-mutilation due to her refusal to communicate with her. Throughout November, they didn't communicate. A few days later, a deputy sheriff called me, requesting that I surrender a firearm registered to my wife, as she's not allowed to have it. This situation makes me question whether my attempts at reconciliation are naive, even though I removed the block after she revealed her thoughts about doing bad things. Believing that such statements should be taken seriously, we resumed correspondence. However, I suspect she's still spending time with her boyfriend and using this situation as a way to spend time with our kids. Given these circumstances, I understand the need to approach her words with caution and a great deal of skepticism. Despite this, I'm uncertain about the sincerity of her intentions. If she were to end her current relationship, regardless of whether she's with him or not, I would consider reconciliation. However, I'd require her to continue with the divorce process according to plan and provide written confirmation of my full custody of our children. I've already filed my response to her divorce application, and we're currently awaiting a court date. I also suspect that she's aware of her unfavorable position in court, which may worsen her situation. She mentioned that her family no longer communicates with her, a fact I can confirm since I'm still in touch with many of them. Furthermore, she expressed a desire to find a job in our city, which I hope she'll consider. Tonight we took our kids to the movies. The therapist who's helping our daughter expressed concerns about her engaging in, so I took swift action. Even our 1-year-old child is overjoyed that his mother has returned to him. Personally, I feel emotionally distant. On the flip side, I'm using the dating app Bumble, and while I've had some decent connections, nothing serious has developed. There are a few people I'd like to form deeper connections with, but the reality is that most people aren't eager to get involved with someone responsible for raising 2 children. What's more, I worry about the possibility that after months of building a meaningful connection with someone, my daughter might reject them. To be honest, if my daughter had rejected me, I would have ended this relationship. After our breakup, my life started improving. I've been attending therapy, monitoring my diet, and even practicing kung fu. Since she left, I've experienced significant personal growth, and I'm uncertain whether it would be unwise to consider reuniting as a family. It's important to note that she's currently attending therapy and taking medication, which is a significant factor to consider. She's also expressed interest in both of us attending couples therapy. The pace at which events are unfolding feels overwhelming. If it turns out that she's pregnant with someone else's child and is trying to manipulate me into raising that child, I won't participate in such a situation. I have many thoughts and doubts swirling in my head, and I'd greatly appreciate any guidance. I'm not certain about what I want at the moment. While I do feel a desire to reconcile with her, I'm also aware of her capabilities. My daughter's well-being significantly influences my decision-making process, so I need to proceed with caution. I can't make decisions based solely on emotions, but I must admit that my children's happiness is of utmost importance to me. If I had the opportunity, I believe it would be valuable to invest another 10 years in a relationship with my ex and put in a genuine effort. It's worth mentioning that although my ex is currently employed and I am not, my status as a disabled veteran with a low rating during our marriage has prompted me to seek help from Veterans Services. They recommended an increase in my rating, which could potentially lead to me earning more than my ex. In any case, such a rating increase would be highly beneficial for me. I tend to agree that becoming the primary caregiver for our children is the more likely outcome. However, given her recent attempts at doing bad things and the fact that I had to hand over her firearm, I believe this strengthens my case for gaining more custody. It's not just about the children's well-being, it's also about the foundation I've worked hard to build. I'm on a positive life path, with or without her, and I'm determined not to look back with regrets, feeling that I didn't do everything possible to keep my family together. She claims to attend therapy 3 times a week and take medication. In our 16 years of marriage, she never engaged in self-mutilation, but after our separation, she made 3 attempts. It's challenging for me to discern what to believe. She's aware of my past as a firefighter and the traumatic situations I often encountered. It's possible that she's using this knowledge as a form of manipulation. However, based on my personal experience, even if people don't resort to ending their lives in this way, they often inflict severe physical bad influence on themselves. Memories of the blood I witnessed still haunt me, and the taste of copper remains vivid in my memory. It was incomprehensible to see a physically strong and muscular man brought to tears, standing in his undergarments, holding onto his wife. I was left in utter perplexity. I recently had a conversation with my daughter, and she expressed a desire for our family to become whole again, with all 4 of us together. I told her that I wouldn't be able to forgive her mother if she continued the relationship and advised her not to set her hopes too high. I've realized that if I continue with the current approach, completely cutting off all contact, it will also affect the children. It seems to me that my negativity towards their mother is evident and has an impact on them. She may not understand the immense effort required for reconciliation, but that's my concern. I can't allow my ex to dictate the pace of my progress, just as I can't allow my kids to determine the outcome. Restoring our family at this point necessitates me setting an example and taking the initiative. It's crucial to demonstrate to my children that I won't succumb to emotional manipulation. Reuniting with this woman won't fix our family. It will only worsen the situation. This thought has been haunting me. How will my daughter perceive the relationship? If she witnesses it, the toxicity might persist, and if her mother leaves again, the consequences will be even more devastating. Additionally, my daughter might inadvertently attract the wrong people into her life because she has already encountered such behavior. On the other hand, this situation can serve as an opportunity to teach them that love is not perfect. It's not a typical romantic comedy scenario, but if my ex is genuinely seeking guidance from therapists, I believe we have a chance. Even if the likelihood of success is just 1%, I'm willing to attempt to restore our family. Of course, I understand perfectly well that all of this could backfire. I realize that if I don't make changes and if she doesn't improve, our relationship is undoubtedly destined to fail. However, if she continues with therapy, takes her medications, and finds self-awareness, we have a chance to overcome everything. In the future, when our children have grown up, and if we decide to go our separate ways, that's something I can accept. If we assume that we're raising them properly, following the values we've set, then I'll evaluate her actions to assess her character. She claims she's no longer involved with the AP, affair partner. She states that she's been undergoing therapy and taking medication since July, explaining that her recent lifestyle hasn't been as pleasant as I assumed, and that she's been feeling sad for several months. I tend to attribute these events to her mental health disorder, so I believe it's necessary to consult with her therapist before considering the possibility of a real reconciliation. If she's diagnosed with bipolar disorder, or if it's confirmed that it was a major depressive episode and she expresses remorse, we might have an opportunity. But if she desires an open relationship, it's better for both of us to move on. I'm truly grateful for all of you for sharing your thoughts and perspectives, as it seems you all understand the pain caused by trauma. I've come to realize that she was using manipulation to push me towards reconciliation. She informed me that after our breakup, she made 3 attempts at doing bad things, and currently, she attends therapy 3 times a week. In our individual talks and group discussions, she mentioned that she's taking medication. Even though I haven't personally spoken to her therapist, I suspect she might be struggling with high levels of depression and codependency. She expressed her intention to quit her current job and shared her desire to find a place nearby to spend more time with the children. She also mentioned how she feels a lack of family in her life. After our recent trip to the movies, she visited us several times, which brought great joy to our daughter. This made me decide to break the period of no contact. The school psychotherapist is worried that my daughter might engage in doing bad things, which is a result of issues stemming from her mother's rejection. On a positive note, my son seems to be doing well, but I can't help but miss her and wish to reunite our family. I remember how much she loved me, especially since we've been together since we were 18. Recently, she asked me out on a date, and although I agreed because she's making an effort, deep down, I understand that I'm not emotionally ready for this. It's important to emphasize that I'm committed to not having a relationship with her. If it were to come to that, I would insist on a paternity test. I won't be deceived or take responsibility for someone else's child. I've made it clear to her that I'd only consider reconciliation if we divorced and I gained full custody of the children. Obtaining 100% custody is my main goal now. With that, if she continues her relationship with her partner and complications arise, I'll have full control, and she'll be able to move on. Furthermore, I'm still active on dating apps. I won't deactivate them until I'm certain she's not seeing anyone else. Additionally, just yesterday, I felt youthful and alive. There wasn't a clear reason for my happiness, but it gave my self-esteem a boost. I usually find myself attracted to people who are a bit too tough for me. I'm sure many of you can relate to my experiences, knowing it's often an uphill battle. But I feel compelled to keep trying for the sake of my children. Yet, I'm incredibly puzzled when she says she was unhappy after our separation. It's hard to reconcile that with her actions, especially when she cheated on me and left our children for someone else. If I were younger, I might have reacted with more anger. But now I'm contemplating the possibility of reconciling with my father, despite our different problem-solving approaches. I hope this decision will lead to a positive outcome, but I'm uncertain about the future. To the best of my knowledge, there's no indication that she's pregnant, and there's no reason to suspect it. Although she appeared hesitant, she has agreed to 100% custody if we reconcile. She insists she's no longer involved with the affair partner or anyone else. But at this stage, it's challenging for me to trust her fully. We exchange apologies through text messages, and we haven't managed to have a one-on-one conversation without the children present. She's expressed regret for seeking confirmation from someone else, but hasn't directly apologized for the betrayal itself. Until she explicitly admits remorse for the betrayal, I will assume she doesn't regret it. On a positive note, she has agreed to attend couples therapy, which is a significant step, given her previous resistance to therapy. This was one of the reasons I hesitated to seek help for my post-traumatic stress disorder. I understand that significant challenges lie ahead, as my heart is still mending. But I'm determined to rebuild my family, no matter the difficulties. I sincerely make this commitment. While she may have broken her vow, I continue to hold firm to the vows I've made throughout my life. Reflecting on what I miss and cherish, I genuinely miss her unwavering dedication to caring for our children. Her caring and affectionate nature made her an exceptional mother for our daughter. I also appreciate her witty and sarcastic humor. The way she pronounces my name holds a special place in my heart, as does her unique fragrance. Her look when I'm about to make a foolish decision fills me with affection. Her belief that I'm an excellent cook brings me joy. Additionally, her ability to be kind and harmonious with others is truly admirable. Ultimately, I'm captivated by her determination to tackle unfamiliar concepts, even if she doesn't fully understand them. I realize how much I value her uniqueness, which aligns with my own. I deeply miss her presence and wholeheartedly apologize for past mistakes. If we end up in court together, the best outcome I can hope for is shared custody with her having overnight visits every weekend. However, my top priority is obtaining full custody of our children. I fully accept the responsibility for any potential setbacks, but 100% custody would provide me with peace of mind, knowing I've done everything in my power. Even with my attempts at reconciliation, I understand the importance of securing the best future for our children. I consistently felt anxiety, realizing that I was only being used as a means for her to see the children. Despite this, she visited the children only a few times and never took care of them for extended periods. I naively hoped that she could become the same mother she was to our children. But she didn't fulfill the role of a mother. Instead, she appeared as someone who feels guilty from time to time and wishes to visit the life I've built. Currently, we are not officially divorced since she filed for divorce last June, and I filed my response. Since then, I haven't received any updates from the court. I decided to wait before taking any further action because in my state, if a parent leaves and doesn't contact their children for a year, they can be accused of child abandonment. In my view, that's exactly what happened, and I hope the lawyer and the judge will agree, granting me sole custody. My dilemma is that she's trying to get better. She shows a desire to visit the children, especially our son, but seems to have refused to rebuild her relationship with her daughter. While I understand that change takes time, it's challenging for me to trust her actions and decisions. None of the above questions relate to our romantic relationship. Should I wait for a court message or take the initiative to consult with a lawyer and file a claim for termination of parental rights, seeking sole custody? If I decide to seek legal assistance, I'll be committed to taking significant steps. I must admit I acted naively, trusting this woman for so long. I genuinely believe that people have inherent goodness. Even if someone stumbles and loses their way, it doesn't mean they are entirely lost. Should I distance myself from my spouse to shield our children from additional trauma? Thankfully, my life with the children is going well. I receive online counseling at a local veterans rehabilitation center, which greatly helps me cope with post-traumatic stress disorder. Recognizing the difficulties my daughter faces, I arranged for her to meet with a counselor provided by her. Unfortunately, my little boy, at the age of 2, still misses his mother and occasionally asks about her. To comfort him, I explain that she's at work when she's not around. It takes him some time to get comfortable with her presence. I'm concerned that her continuous involvement in his life at this crucial stage might exacerbate his future problems and difficulties. Every morning we have a lovely ritual of reading and singing children's songs. Throughout the day, we engage in fun activities until his sister returns home. It's a joy to witness his progress. Every day he learns a new word, and overall, he radiates genuine happiness. In anticipation of potential consequences of abandonment at his age, I'm teaching him soothing techniques like breathing exercises and engaging hand games. As for me, I've dared to explore dating apps and met several potential partners. But I understand that I'm not yet ready for a serious relationship. For now, I take solace in focusing on my personal growth, dedicating time to exercise and therapy. I handle the upbringing and care of my children solo, even though full custody comes with some downsides. I don't expect to receive alimony from my ex-spouse, which, although I wouldn't mind, would certainly help financially. Another issue is my son possibly holding a grudge against me for not letting his mother in and not providing her with assistance. But I believe it's in the children's best interest for this dishonest and mentally unwell woman to be absent from our lives. Now, 7 months have passed. The divorce process was lengthy and painful, during which my ex-wife caused herself physical bad influence and had a long recovery. But ultimately, I've cut this woman out of my life and the lives of my children. I received a court order preventing her from approaching me and the children. She is currently in a mental health facility, and I'm doing everything I can to ensure my children lead happy lives and move on from the negative impact of their mother.